Hey guys, tonight we're sliding a frozen aluminum tray into a 425-degree oven and waiting for dinner to happen. Not the cozy, nostalgic, and soft-focus version of the 1950s. The real one. The one where the turkey was pressed into a shape, the sweet potato had already given up, and the whole meal arrived in a box designed to look like a television set. This is the story of the TV dinner: 260 tons of unsold turkey, a salesman with an airplane tray, and a home economist nobody bothered to put on the box. If this is your kind of bedtime story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy drifting off to mildly disturbing, deeply factual history. And thank you to whoever suggested tonight's topic. I hope you're already horizontal. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. For a lot of you, it's somewhere around 4 a.m., which is, statistically, the exact hour a person is most likely to be eating something they probably shouldn't. Straight out of a cold tray, in the dark, dim the lights, get your fan going for some soft white noise, pull the blanket up, and maybe tuck your hands underneath, just in case the aluminum tray is still hot enough to take the skin off your fingertips, which it is. Have you ever wondered how a Danish immigrant in Omaha accidentally reorganized the American dinner hour? Or what a Brooklyn naturalist watching the Inuit freeze fish in 1912 had to do with your Tuesday night supper? How do you get turkey, sweet potato, and cornbread dressing to cook correctly at the same time, from a frozen block, in a home oven, and what happens when you don't quite manage it? Did anyone actually enjoy the sweet potato once the freeze-thaw cycle was done with it? Were the 3 compartments really about convenience, or were they for children who treated a single rogue pea touching the dressing as a personal betrayal? And who, exactly, decided the box should look like a television? And did it work? Congratulations! You've just woken up in suburban America, 1953. The television is warming up. The oven is climbing toward 425. The aluminum tray on the counter is cold enough to leave a chill on your fingertips, and it smells like nothing at all yet, but it will. Good luck. You are standing in your kitchen at 4:30 inches the afternoon, which in 1954 is the universal hour of quiet domestic dread. Dinner is in 2 hours. Your husband expects something on the table when he comes through the door, and the table expects something on it, and you are the person responsible for closing that gap. You open the refrigerator, you close the refrigerator, nothing inside has changed since the last time you checked, 4 minutes ago. The clock above the stove keeps moving regardless of how you feel about it. Let's talk about what dinner actually costs you right now. Not money, but time. A roast takes 3 hours. A proper chicken takes 2. Even a pot of soup requires someone to stand next to it with opinions and a spoon. You may have worked this morning, or gotten a child to school, or done both in the same 2-hour window while maintaining the general appearance of someone who has everything under control. The oven doesn't know any of that. The oven just sits there, waiting, like a project manager with no context. This is where the particular pressure of 1954 lives. The magazines on your kitchen counter, and there are magazines, have this month's casserole suggestions, this season's gelatin molds, a column reminding you that a well-run home is a reflection of your character as a woman. One of them features a Jell-O salad on the cover that is, frankly, more architectural than culinary. A woman named Patricia has contributed her recipe. Patricia appears to have unlimited time. You do not have what Patricia has. Of course, the television is on in the other room, or it will be by 6. Your household is one of millions that went from no television to a television in the space of about 18 months, because in 1950, roughly 9% of American homes had a set, and by 1955 that number hit 65%, which means the living room just reorganized itself around a grey screen, and the whole country rescheduled its evenings accordingly. Dinner now competes with programming. The table competes with the couch. You are cooking against a broadcast schedule. A neighbor named Dorothea, 3 houses down, 2 children, a husband who commutes, has mentioned something called a TV dinner. She described it with a small shrug, the way people describe a shortcut they're slightly embarrassed to know about. You heat it in the oven. 25 minutes. It comes in a tray. It looks, she said, like a little television on the box, which is either charming or a warning, depending on how you look at it. The idea is, everything fits in one aluminum tray. Turkey, dressing, sweet potato. 3 separate compartments so the foods don't touch, which is basically a Lunchable invented 30 years early and aimed at the whole family. You put it in the oven cold and you take it out ready. The tray goes in the trash. No dishes. That last part is the one that stays with you. No dishes. In a decade still shaped by the thrift habits of the Depression, throwing away a tray after one use is a mild act of rebellion. Your mother washed and reused everything. She had opinions about waste that she delivered at medium volume during holidays. The aluminum tray is basically a single-use coffee pod, decades before anyone felt guilty about it. And right now, at 4:30 inches the afternoon, guilt is a quiet, expensive, and entirely optional luxury you can't afford until at least 7 p.m. The refrigerator hums, the clock moves, the oven, for now, stays cold. You have just bought a television set, and you are about to learn that you didn't buy a television set. You bought a new center of gravity for the entire house. The box arrives, enormous and wood-paneled, and the delivery men set it down in the living room with the solemnity of men installing an altar. You stand back and look at it. Then you look at the armchairs, which are pointed at the fireplace, and you understand slowly that the armchairs are now pointed at the wrong thing. Everything in the room will have to turn. The fireplace doesn't take this well. It had been the focal point of the room since the house was built, the thing you arranged other things around, the reason the mantel exists and why someone once hung a mirror above it at exactly that height. Now it's a wall feature, decorative. The fireplace has been demoted to a sideboard with flames, and nobody's going to say that out loud, but everyone in the room knows it. The TV tray, now, it's not a tray. It's a folding metal stand with a small laminated surface roughly the size of a cafeteria platter, sold in sets of 4 by Samsonite and a dozen other manufacturers who appeared overnight once they understood what was happening. By the mid-1950s, several million units a year are moving out of department stores and into suburban living rooms. Your neighbor Harold, the one who wears a sport coat to mow the lawn, carried his home from the hardware store in a flat box under one arm, and he assembled all 4 in under 10 minutes with the focused, quiet, and slightly evangelical energy of a man who has found his purpose. He set them up in a row. He stood back. He was satisfied. The tray folds out with a small metallic snap and sits at elbow height for a person seated in an armchair. It holds a plate, a glass, and approximately 1 newspaper before structural confidence becomes questionable. It doesn't wobble, exactly. It considers wobbling. The consideration is always present. Of course, this entire arrangement requires a meal that can travel from the kitchen to the living room without dissolving or requiring a second pair of hands. This is where the TV dinner enters the conversation with the quiet inevitability of something that was always going to happen. The living room has reorganized itself around the screen. The screen runs from 7 to 10 in the evening. The kitchen is 40 feet away and going dark. Something had to close that distance, and it wasn't going to be the television. By 1955, roughly 65% of American households have a set. That number was 9% in 1950. 5 years. The furniture industry noticed. The appliance industry noticed. Swanson noticed. What the television did to the dinner hour wasn't incidental, it was architectural. The room told you where to sit. The schedule told you when to eat. The only remaining question was what, exactly, would be on the tray when you sat down. A set from RCA or Zenith in 1953 ran between $200 and $400, which is the equivalent of a used car, except the used car didn't require you to rearrange your entire living room and develop opinions about antenna placement. You negotiated the price. You arranged delivery. You spent a weekend pointing the antenna at things. Your son Dennis, who is 9, climbed onto the roof to hold the antenna while you stood in the yard and shouted directions that were slightly wrong. This went on longer than it needed to. The screen itself, once everything is finally pointed correctly, is small, 12 inches, maybe 17 if you bought up. The image is grey and slightly soft, the way a photograph looks when someone breathed on it. And yet the room organises itself toward it with total conviction. Dinner gets quieter. Conversation shrinks to fit the commercial breaks. The table in the dining room, which your mother's mother would have considered the civilized centre of the household day, starts to feel formal, occasion-specific, a little stiff. The living room, on the other hand, has never been more comfortable. It has a screen and 4 folding trays and something warm and aluminum-wrapped cooling on them, and for now, that is enough. You are at the supermarket, leaning over a long open freezer chest, and you have committed to this posture for longer than is comfortable. The cold rises straight up into your face. Your fingers, hovering over the packages, have started to ache. Somewhere at the bottom of this chest is the dinner you came for, and to reach it you must bend further into the cold than you would like a woman fishing for something she dropped down a well. The frost on the packages makes them feel like cold stones. You keep reaching anyway. The chest freezer itself is relatively new. By 1955, there are roughly 25,000 supermarkets in the United States, and the open-topped freezer aisle is a standard feature in most of them. A long, humming, low-walled trough of cold air running the length of a wall, products packed in tight and furred with frost, the whole arrangement suggesting a very organized, frosted and faintly menacing avalanche. 5 years ago, this fixture didn't exist in most grocery stores. Now it's just where food lives. Consider what's in there. There are frozen vegetables, Birdseye mostly, which have been available since 1930, but spent most of those 25 years being ignored. There are frozen fish portions in waxed boxes. There are things in bags and things in cartons and things wrapped in foil that you have to read the packaging on before you understand what they are. And then, in a box designed to look like a television set, there's the Swanson TV dinner, grey-blue screen, dark frame. It's basically an instruction manual in packaging form. The box is telling you to go home, turn something on, and eat this. A woman named Dolores Marsh, third shift at the frozen food section of a Kroger in Columbus, uses a wooden-handled mallet to break the frost-sealed packages apart when they clump. She does this with the calm rhythm of someone who has accepted her relationship with ice. She doesn't look at you. She has broken up more frost since October than some people encounter in a lifetime. You pull a Swanson box from the bottom of the pile. It's cold enough that it stings. The package feels like it weighs nothing. 11 by 7 inches of aluminum tray under a decorated cardboard sleeve, and yet it's dense and rigid in your hands. The contents frozen solid into a single unit. You can't feel the individual compartments through the box. You can't feel anything at all in your fingertips after about 30 seconds. The price is 98 cents, which is a real number, not a symbolic one. That is less than $1 for a complete evening meal, including turkey, dressing, and sweet potato in a tray you'll never wash. For context, a pound of ground beef is about 55 cents in 1955, and you still have to cook it, plate it, and clean up afterward. The aluminum tray has no cleanup. The aluminum tray is the cleanup. Of course, the aluminum tray is also a small, ongoing scandal. You were raised by people who reused everything. Wax paper, rubber bands, tin foil, because throwing usable material away was something you did only if you had something wrong with you. The Depression had opinions about waste, and those opinions were thorough. Dropping a tray in the trash after one dinner feels, faintly, like a moral statement. Like a single-use coffee pod, but decades before anyone had the vocabulary for the guilt. The competitors are in the chest too. Morton TV dinners showed up in 1954, a little cheaper and a little less committed to the premium turkey presentation. Banquet Foods is cheaper still, 10 to 20 cents off the Swanson price, aimed at the household that wants the concept without paying Swanson's premium. Stouffer's is at the other end, a foil tray product that costs more and implies you have taste. By 1955, there are at least a dozen brands in this chest, and the category is doing about $30 million a year in retail sales. The frozen food chest is no longer a novelty. It's a department. You put a Swanson box and a Morton box in your cart, for comparison purposes, and then stand there for a moment while the cold comes up at your face and the frost settles back over everything you've disturbed. The packages you moved are already going quiet again under a fresh skim of ice. The chest doesn't care what you chose. It keeps everything at the same temperature regardless. You get the frozen dinner home, and now you must put it somewhere, and this is where you meet the limits of your own refrigerator. The freezer compartment is a small frosted box at the top, designed in an era when nobody expected you to freeze anything larger than an ice tray. It is already full. There is a forgotten bag of peas in there, fused to the back wall, that has been with you since the Truman administration. You begin the negotiation. Something must come out so the dinner can go in. The freezer does not make this easy. The box is roughly 11 by 7 inches, about the footprint of a hardcover novel, but thicker and colder, and with more opinions about where it will fit. You angle it. You push. The peas do not yield. There is also a container of something that was once either chicken broth or brown ice, and it has wedged itself diagonally in a way that suggests it has been there long enough to consider itself permanent, settled, and possibly structural. You get the TV dinner in eventually, but the freezer door now closes with the specific resistance of something that is cooperating under protest. Now, the wait. The instructions say to preheat to 425 degrees, cook 25 to 30 minutes. Swanson's team set that window deliberately, timed to finish at a natural break in the evening's programming. Basically Netflix building a countdown into the autoplay, except the countdown is your oven, and the autoplay is Ed Sullivan. You preheat, you wait. By minute 10, the kitchen smells like nothing. By minute 20, gravy steam arrives first, followed by rendered turkey fat and the sage thyme onion cloud from the dressing compartment, and the whole room has been saturated with something that is recognizably Thanksgiving but compressed, institutional, faintly metallic underneath. The smell does not ask permission. Your neighbour, Doris, pulls hers out at exactly the wrong moment. She's using the corner of her apron, and the aluminum tray is hot enough to mean it. The edges of the turkey compartment have gone dark and dry in a way that suggests the tray did not distribute heat as a single unified experience. The centre of the sweet potato is still cool. This is Betty Cronin's core problem, solved imperfectly in every single oven across the country. The geometry of simultaneous heat is more complicated than it sounds, and the frozen block has its own ideas about which compartment thaws first. Doris sets it on the counter and waits 2 more minutes. The tray ticks as it cools. It has a kind of institutional patience. The turkey itself is pre-sliced and compressed, which is to say it is not quite turkey in the way you might have carved it off a bird. It is closer to a very confident luncheon meat that has decided to be served warm. The sweet potato has gone soft and wet in a way only the freeze-thaw cycle knows how to do. Starchy, yielding, texturally somewhere between applesauce and regret. There is 1,100 milligrams of sodium in the tray, which in 1955 nobody is required to tell you. The salt is there because it has to be there. It covers the flat, pale flavours that freezing and reheating leave behind, which is basically the seasoning philosophy of an airport Auntie Anne's applied to an entire decade, except nobody has named it that yet. The TV tray stand, which you've unfolded from the closet, is one of several million sold this year alone. Samsonite makes them. They come in sets of 4, which assumes the whole family is eating in front of the set, which increasingly they are. The stand wobbles slightly if you lean on it. You know this, and lean anyway. The tray sits there in its compartments: turkey, dressing, sweet potato, each food in its own lane, not touching, not mingling, not required to have a relationship with its neighbours. The children, when they're eating, find this deeply satisfying. The 3 compartments were not designed for children specifically, but children understood them immediately, in the way children always understand things that keep order in a chaotic world. Each thing in its place. Each thing knowable. The corn doesn't touch the turkey. Nobody asks it to. You are holding the box, and the box is holding a conversation with you. It has been printed to look like a television set, a cool, muted, and slightly glowing grey-blue screen inside a dark frame. The dials suggested along the side, and this is not an accident. The design is an instruction. It is telling you, without saying a single word, exactly where you are meant to eat this, and what you are meant to be looking at while you do. You turn the box over to find the actual cooking directions. The front of the box has already told you the important part. Consider what this kind of packaging is doing, because it's doing quite a lot. A cereal box tells you it's cereal. A soup can tells you it's soup. This box tells you it's an activity. It is basically a neon diner sign glowing in the window, except the sign is the box, and what it's telling you is to stop talking to your family and orient yourself toward the screen. Swanson didn't design a meal. Swanson designed a permission slip, and then they printed it on 4 sides of a rectangle and put turkey inside. The grey-blue of the screen panel was chosen deliberately. Not red, not yellow, the exact cool, slightly muted blue of a television warming up in a dim room. A graphic designer named Gerald sat with colour swatches at some point in 1953 and selected the one that said living room, evening, screen already on. Gerald had opinions. The box inherited them. Now, the cooking directions are on the back, and they are confident. Preheat to 425 degrees. Cook 25 to 30 minutes. That's it. There's no paragraph of caveats, no asterisked footnote reminding you that results may vary depending on your oven. The instructions were engineered by Betty Cronin, who had spent months in a Swanson test kitchen persuading turkey, sweet potato, and cornbread dressing to become edible at the same moment from the same frozen starting point, which is a problem that sounds trivial until you try it, at which point it reveals itself to be somewhere between a logic puzzle and a hostage negotiation. The sweet potato wants low heat, the gravy wants high heat, the dressing is undecided. Betty Cronin made them agree. The box does not mention Betty Cronin. The tray inside, once you peel away the outer sleeve, looks institutional in a way the packaging was designed to soften. The aluminum has a slight give when warm, a slight resistance when cold. Marta, a line worker at the Omaha plant, had pressed the plastic wrap tight across each tray on a 6-hour shift in a room kept below freezing, wearing gloves thick enough that fine motor work was mostly optimistic. The tray you're holding went through her hands. She didn't know your name. You don't know hers. The tray connects you both in a way that is either quite touching or very 1953, depending on how you look at it. This is where the box's design language does something quietly interesting. The televisions in 1953 American living rooms weren't objects you put on the table. They occupied corners. They sat on stands or low cabinets, slightly elevated, with the screen angled gently outward. The Swanson box, propped on the kitchen counter while you read it, mimicked that posture. Upright, rectangular, screen forward. You weren't reading the back of a food package. You were, in a soft and completely unspoken way, already watching something. And the numbers behind the box are very calm about what just happened. Swanson sold 10 million of these in the first year, not 10 million over a decade, not 10 million across a product line. 10 million turkey dinners in 12 months at 98 cents each. The math on that is approximately 10 million people holding this specific box, reading these specific instructions and deciding that yes, this was a reasonable Friday night. The tray, the stand, the screen, the whole coordinated domestic arrangement, it had arrived, and it had arrived at scale, and the box was just sitting there looking like a television and waiting for you to preheat. You turn the oven dial to 425 degrees and begin the wait, which is the part nobody mentions. The dinner is sold as convenience, but convenience, it turns out, still requires you to heat an entire oven to nearly the temperature of a kiln and then stand near it for half an hour. The kitchen warms, you hover. There is no light that tells you the oven has reached temperature, so you simply guess, the way your mother guessed, the way her mother guessed before her. Hot, ready, and approximately correct. The oven gives no signal. You are expected to know. Swanson's marketing team studied television schedules when they set the cook time. 25 to 30 minutes was not chosen because that's how long turkey and sweet potato need. It was chosen because that's how long until the first act break. You slide the tray in, the timer starts. Somewhere in the living room, the Ed Sullivan theme is still going, and you have exactly one episode to get through before dinner has to exist. The oven is, in this sense, basically Netflix's autoplay countdown, except the countdown is also heating your food and your kitchen and faintly your patience. By minute 15, the smell arrives before the food does. Rendered turkey fat, sage, thyme, the starchy warmth of cornbread dressing, all of it moving through the house at once, announcing something institutional, but not unpleasant. A neighbor named Doris, if she were to walk in right now, would say it smells like Thanksgiving. Doris would be approximately 40% correct. Somewhere under the dressing aroma, there's a faint metallic undertone that nobody mentions in the marketing, which the aluminum tray contributes quietly and without apology. Let's talk about the tray coming out of the oven. You grip it through a doubled pot holder, because the oven mitt is wherever oven mitts go. The aluminum has been sitting in a 425 degree box for half an hour. It behaves accordingly. The corners will brand a fingerprint into you if you grab them wrong, a reminder that lasts several days. You set it down. You look at it. The edges are overcooked. The center is not. This is not a flaw in your oven or your technique. This is a flaw in physics. Betty Cronin spent her professional life trying to solve the problem of getting 3 separate foods, turkey with gravy, cornbread dressing, sweet potato, to all reach edible temperature simultaneously from a fully frozen state. She came close. She came close the way you come close to getting everyone to agree on a restaurant. Technically a resolution, Practically still a negotiation at the table. The sweet potato has softened the way it always softens, quietly, completely, and without much dignity. The turkey is pre-sliced and compressed, warmer than the sweet potato, pressed into the gravy in a way that puts it closer to the deli counter end of the poultry spectrum than the carved bird end. The cornbread dressing is fine. The cornbread dressing is always fine. It is the most forgiving of the three, and you respect it for that. The salt is doing structural work, covering the flat, slightly stale flavor that freezing and reheating leave behind in everything they touch. You don't notice the salt specifically. You notice that the food tastes like more than it looks, which was the intended effect, and in that respect, it is a success. You carry the tray to the living room on a TV tray stand, which is itself a product that did not meaningfully exist 5 years ago and now sells several million units a year. Samsonite makes one. It folds. It has a satisfying click when the legs lock. You set it in front of your chair, position the tray, and consider that you are, in some technical sense, eating dinner exactly as the packaging instructed. The box told you to do this. You have done this. The oven timer for once did not lie. You slide the tray into the oven exactly as the program begins, because you have learned to read the cooking time as a kind of clock. 25 to 30 minutes, the box says, which is, and this is not a coincidence, almost precisely the length of the first half of whatever you are about to watch. The men who designed this dinner studied the television schedule before they wrote the directions. You put the tray in at the opening titles. Dinner will be ready at the first commercial break. The timing is suspiciously perfect. Swanson's team knew what was on at 7. They knew what was on at 8. I Love Lucy is pulling 60 million viewers on Tuesday nights, and the episode runs 26 minutes before the first break. They knew that too. The cook time isn't a coincidence, and it isn't carelessness. It's the oven as autoplay countdown, except instead of asking if you're still watching, it just gives you turkey. The schedule then, because the schedule is the whole point. Evening primetime runs 7 to 10, and that window, Ed Sullivan, Dragnet, whatever Jack Webb is doing seriously into a camera, has eaten the old dinner hour alive. 6 o'clock used to mean something. It meant the table was set and someone had been standing near a stove since 4:30. Now 6 o'clock means the set is warming up and the tray goes in 25 minutes before the show you actually want. The oven and the television have reached a quiet agreement, and you are the beneficiary. A neighbour down the street, call her Mrs. Potowski, sets her kitchen timer with the gravity of someone diffusing something, then carries the folded TV tray into the living room and snaps it open in front of her husband's chair before he's noticed she's moved. She does this in one continuous motion, without breaking eye contact with the screen. It's a skill. It took months. This is where the box earns its design. The packaging, as you've now handled it a dozen times, is printed in grey-blue and dark-framed because it's meant to look like the thing you're sitting in front of, which is basically a theatre marquee, except the marquee is the dinner, and what it's advertising is where to sit and what to stop doing. You don't need words. The box says, go sit down. You go sit down. The children are easier to convince than you expected. The 3 compartments appeal to something specific and firm in them, the deep ethical conviction that the sweet potato must not touch the turkey, and neither should touch anything else. The tray honours this. It has load-bearing walls. It takes the position seriously. By the late 50s, Swanson adds a 4th compartment with an apple cobbler, which is less a dessert than a diplomatic gesture. The tray acknowledging that children are stakeholders with preferences, and those preferences involve a brownie that has not been compromised by proximity to gravy. Of course, the children mostly see this meal on specific nights. The nights when you and your husband are heading out and a babysitter is settling in on the couch. This gives the TV dinner a faintly contraband quality. It arrives when the rules are softer, when nobody is requiring you to eat at the table or discuss your day. The babysitter heats the tray. The babysitter eats her own tray. Everyone watches the same program and nobody is asked how school was. The TV dinner is, in this sense, a small vacation. The children understand this. Back in the kitchen, the timer is running. 23 minutes in, the smell arrives before the food does, rendered turkey fat and sage-forward dressing pushing through the oven door and saturating the room in something that is almost a sundae but not quite. Warm and institutional. Present. The gravy has opinions about the dressing and vice versa, and by minute 25 the whole tray has committed to a unified position on what it smells like, which is dinner, technically. The commercial break arrives. So does the tray. You open the oven, and now you must extract the tray, and the tray has spent half an hour becoming a serious hazard. Aluminum conducts heat with great enthusiasm and no mercy. The thing is hot enough to brand you, and it is also thin and flexible, so it bends in the middle exactly when you don't want it to, threatening to fold your dinner onto the oven floor. You arm yourself with a dish towel folded 4 times. You commit. The journey from oven to tray stand is short and genuinely dangerous. The smell hits the kitchen first. Gravy steam, then rendered poultry fat, then a warm, starchy and aggressively herbal cloud of sage and thyme and onion dressing, all arriving at once like a delegation. It's not a bad smell. It's warm and institutional and aggressively specific, like someone has been slow roasting a school cafeteria inside your walls. By minute 25, the whole suburb smells the same. Every house on the block is opening its oven at the same moment, extracting the same tray, committing to the same dish towel. You set it down on the tray stand and look at what you have. The edges are overcooked. The turkey at the border of the large compartment has crisped in a way turkey was not designed to crisp. The center is warm but not hot. The sweet potato is technically heated through, though it never quite shakes the memory of the freezer and has decided not to fully recover. The cornbread dressing has formed a crust on the top that gives way to something dense and steamy underneath. It is not what a turkey dinner is. It is what a turkey dinner becomes when Betty Cronin spends 6 months trying to make 3 things simultaneously edible from a single frozen state in a 25-minute window. She mostly succeeded. Mostly. The turkey itself, now. It's pre-sliced and compressed before freezing, which means by the time it reaches your tray it has the structural profile of a very committed cold cut. You can cut it with a fork. You don't need the knife. This is either a convenience or a warning, depending on your relationship with poultry. A neighbor named Gerald sets his tray down, picks up a fork, eats a bite, and nods once in the direction of the television. Not at you. At the television. He has been eating in this room for 6 months, and the furniture is now oriented entirely toward the screen, which has been on since 5:30. Gerald doesn't comment on the food. Gerald doesn't comment on much. The tray keeps everything where it belongs, and so does the room. The salt is doing its job quietly. It covers what freezing and reheating do to flavor, that flat, stale quality that lingers behind everything processed and reassembled. You don't taste the compromise. You taste the salt instead. The tray itself is thin enough to feel insubstantial once it cools. After dinner, you pick it up by one edge and it flexes. There's a faint metallic undertone some people blame on the aluminum, though food scientists would tell you it's more complicated than that. You look at it. It is dirty. It is bent slightly from the oven. You hold it over the trash can. This is where the culture raises an objection. The tray is disposable. Single use, thrown away after one meal, which in 1954 offends a generation raised on Depression-era thrift and the wartime habit of recycling everything down to the foil wrapper. Your mother saved tin cans. Your grandmother knitted from unraveled sweaters. And here is this tray, designed by a food company to be used once and discarded, like a single-use coffee pod decades before anyone felt guilty about it. The critics who aren't complaining about the food are complaining about the tray. It is, they say, a sign of something. The tray lands in the bin. The television continues. You sit down with your dinner and discover that it has been heated unevenly, which is the permanent and unsolvable condition of the frozen tray. The edges of the turkey are slightly overcooked, drying at the rim. The center of the sweet potato is still cool, faintly chilled, holding onto the freezer the way a grudge holds onto a person. You ate from the outside in, hoping the middle would catch up to the edges. It never quite does. Every bite is a small negotiation between too hot and not hot enough. This was Betty Cronin's problem. Hers specifically, professionally, and on a daily basis. Cronin was the Swanson home economist who spent her working hours at a kitchen bench in Omaha trying to make turkey, cornbread dressing, and sweet potato all arrive at edible temperature simultaneously, from frozen, in a 4, 2, 5 degree oven in 25 to 30 minutes. 3 different foods, 3 different densities, 1 deadline. The tray did not care about the deadline. Consider the sweet potato. A sweet potato has a high water content. When you freeze it, that water forms ice crystals inside the cell walls. When you reheat it, Those same cells release the water back into the flesh all at once, producing a texture that is soft, wet, and faintly apologetic in a way that cannot be explained and can only be experienced. The sweet potato in your tray has gone somewhere beyond cooked. It has become a statement about what happens when you trust a vegetable to a industrial process it was never designed for. The sweet potato does not complain. It simply collapses. The dressing held better. Cornbread dressing has a structure that freezing found less objectionable, dry, starchy, already a little dense, and it arrived warm at the edges and adequately warm everywhere else. This made it the reliable compartment. You returned to it between negotiations with the other two. The dressing had decided to be fine about the whole situation, which is more than can be said for anyone else on the tray. Meanwhile, a Swanson food technician named Harold Swigert presses a probe thermometer into the center of a test tray, writes down a number, frowns at the number, and adjusts the foil coverage over the sweet potato by approximately 3/4 of an inch. He has done this 11 times today. The number is always wrong in a slightly different way. He covers the tray again and slides it back into the oven. The oven does not acknowledge the adjustment. Cronin's solution involved partial foil shields over the portions that overcooked fastest, letting the slower sections absorb more heat. It was less a recipe than a managed truce, the tray's 3 zones operating under different thermal conditions at the same time. The final design worked well enough that 10 million people bought it in the first year without returning it. That's the bar. Not perfect. Edible, reproducible, and finished before the commercial break. The 5 to 3 0-minute window wasn't accidental. Swanson's team had studied the evening schedule. I Love Lucy, Ed Sullivan Dragnet, and set the cook time so dinner came out of the oven at a natural pause point in the programming. It's basically Netflix building the autoplay countdown into your oven, except the countdown is your dinner, and the next episode is already happening without you. You had a window. The turkey was aware of the window. You both understood the terms. The compartments themselves were the meal's one genuine engineering success. 3 separate zones meant the gravy didn't touch the dressing and the dressing didn't touch the sweet potato. Children specifically appreciated this, with the kind of territorial conviction that small people bring to contested food borders. The separated compartments were, in effect, a Lunchable aimed at the entire American family 30 years early. You finish the dressing first, then you work through the turkey from the outer edges inward, finding it adequate in the way that things designed by a committee operating under a railroad car deadline can be adequate. The sweet potato you leave for last, having made your peace with its condition. It is cool in the middle and warm at the edge and wet throughout, and it is yours, and the television is on, and there is nowhere else you are supposed to be. You take your first proper bite, and there is a great deal of salt, and there is something else underneath the salt that you can't quite name. The salt is doing a job. Freezing and reheating flatten the flavor out of food, leaving it dull and far away, and the only thing that drags it back is salt, applied with a generosity that borders on aggression. Beneath all of it sits a faint metallic note, cool and thin, which some people blame on the tray. You decide not to think about the tray. You reach for the water glass. The single turkey dinner in front of you contains about 1,100 milligrams of sodium. Nobody is required to tell you that. The label lists the contents, turkey, gravy, cornbread dressing, sweet potato, and stops there, politely, the way a magician stops before explaining the trick. Your average daily intake this decade runs somewhere around 3,400 milligrams, which means dinner tonight is handling roughly a third of it in one tray, and that number has been arrived at by consensus of nobody in particular. The salt doesn't announce itself. It just makes everything taste like it's trying harder than it actually is. The tray itself for a moment because the tray has a presence. It's stamped aluminum, surplus material from a war that needed aircraft, and left behind enough cheap, light, and endlessly stampable metal to package an entire decade's worth of convenience meals. It came out of the oven ready to punish anyone who reached for it bare-handed, which you did. The edges of the food are slightly overdone, the center of the turkey is slightly underdone. The tray doesn't apologize for this. It has done its job, technically speaking, in the same way a bus does its job by depositing you 1 mile from where you actually needed to go. Margaret, the woman 3 houses down who tried a competing brand last Tuesday, told you it tasted like the inside of a filing cabinet. She said this without hostility. It was an observation. The metallic note in your tray is subtler than that, faint enough that you can talk yourself out of it between bites, which is what most people do. The tray sits at the edge of your sensory experience like a quiet, uninvited third party to the meal, present, not commenting, just there. The turkey itself is pre-sliced and compressed, with a texture that is less carved bird and more architectural. It holds its shape in a way that a freshly roasted bird never quite does. That is to say, it holds it perfectly, unnaturally, like something that has made a decision to remain intact regardless of circumstances. A Thanksgiving turkey falls apart when you touch it. This turkey does not fall apart. This turkey has a position on falling apart, and that position is no. The gravy helps. The gravy is the diplomat of the tray, smoothing things over, warm and starchy and patient, covering whatever conversation is happening beneath it. Of course, none of this is what the box promised you. The box, with its grey-blue screen printed in a dark frame, sitting on the counter behind you now, showed a steam-rising golden-browned meal in clean separate portions. The box knew what it was doing. It told you with great confidence that this was dinner and television and modernity, all in one tray that you could throw away afterward without washing a single dish. In a house still faintly shaped by depression habits, throwing away a tray felt quietly scandalous. You do it anyway. The tray cools fast. Within minutes it's just aluminum again, light and ordinary, giving nothing away. You unfold the TV tray stand in front of your armchair, and the act of unfolding it is its own small ritual now. 5 years ago this object did not exist in your house. Now it lives in a rack by the wall, one of a matching set of 4, ready to be deployed in front of each chair the moment dinner is announced. It wobbles slightly on the carpet. You learn which leg to favour. The stand is flimsy, decorated with a pattern of flowers or a map of the world, and it holds exactly one dinner and nothing more. Samsonite started selling them in sets of 4 by the mid-1950s, and a few million units moved per year by the time the decade hit its stride. The set of 4 detail is important. You don't buy one TV tray stand, you buy a social arrangement. 4 stands means the whole family eats in front of the set, each of you with your own aluminum rectangle, all facing the same direction. Dinner stops being a conversation. It becomes an audience. The tray itself measures roughly 11 by 7 inches, which is large enough to hold your dinner and small enough to guarantee your elbows have nowhere safe to go. The 3 compartments sit in front of you like a small, tidy and faintly institutional diorama. Turkey on the left, taking up the most real estate. Sweet potato in the upper right, dressing in the lower right. The portions are sized to fit a tray, not a person, which means you finish and feel like you've eaten, and also like something else may have been planned that didn't show up. Meanwhile, across the room, the television is doing what it was built to do. It's around 7 in the evening. I Love Lucy is either on now or recently over. Ed Sullivan is coming. The light from the screen moves. Your tray stand holds steady, or almost steady. The wobble returns if you lean on it wrong, and you have leaned on it wrong several times. Now, the children. For the children, the TV tray stand is pure event. Margaret, who is 7 and has very specific feelings about food adjacency, is grateful for the compartments. The turkey does not touch the sweet potato. The sweet potato does not touch the dressing. This is the most organised her dinner has ever been, and she finds it deeply satisfying in a way she can't articulate. She eats the dressing first. She always eats the dressing first. No one stops her because no one is looking. Ed Sullivan has just introduced someone. The stand has a particular sound when you set the aluminum tray down, a flat, light clank, not heavy, not reassuring, just present. The tray rocks briefly, the gravy shifts toward the lip of the turkey compartment, and you steady it with 2 fingers. This is also part of the ritual now. You've gotten good at it. Of course, the older relatives have opinions. Your mother, who grew up reusing the same pot every night for 40 years, looks at the matching set of stands and the 4 separate aluminum trays and calculates something silently. She doesn't say the number out loud. She ate at a table her whole life. She set the table. She cleared it. The clearing took longer than the eating, and that was fine. That was correct. That was how a meal ended. Now dinner ends when the program ends. The trays go in the trash. The stands fold back into the rack. The rack by the wall is a new piece of furniture in a decade full of new pieces of furniture. It holds the stands upright, folded flat, 4 in a row, like a very small filing system for leisure. You don't think about it as furniture exactly. It's more like equipment. The TV tray stand is gear for the living room, the same way the chest freezer is gear for the garage. Everything has its station. Everything is ready to deploy. Somewhere in Omaha, 10 refrigerated rail cars have become 10 million dinners in 12 months, and 4 of them are sitting in front of your television right now, balanced on stands that wobble just slightly to the left. The wobble is not a defect, it's a feature you've adapted to. That distinction is starting to blur. You carry your dinner past the dining table, the real one, the one with the leaves and the matching chairs, and you sit down somewhere else entirely. This is the part that would have scandalized your grandmother. For her, dinner happened at the table, facing one another, talking, because that was simply what a family was. Now you face the same direction, all of you, toward the glowing screen, and nobody says very much. The table sits empty in the next room, set for a meal that increasingly happens somewhere else. It waits patiently. It is very good at waiting. Consider what the dining table actually meant, and what it suddenly doesn't. For roughly a century, the table was the mechanism, the place where you negotiated who was angry at whom, what happened at school, whether the budget would survive October. You looked at your children's faces. They looked back, unhappily. Conversation happened whether anyone wanted it to. The table enforced it. Now the table has been quietly decommissioned, replaced by 4 folding stands and 4 aluminum trays and 1 program everyone agreed on, or at least nobody vetoed loudly enough. The television schedules this for you. Your Tuesday arrives with I Love Lucy already underway at 8, and you're not going to miss the first act, and the tray was designed for exactly this. And Swanson's marketing team knew exactly which night it was when they set the cook time at 25 minutes. This is basically Netflix's autoplay countdown, except the countdown is your oven, and nobody has named it a feature yet. A neighbour named Dale arrives at the wrong moment, 6:50, already in his coat, holding a covered dish his wife sent, and finds the family installed in front of the set with their trays, mid-bite, all facing the same direction. Dale stands in the doorway for a moment. He adjusts the dish slightly, as if repositioning it might change what he's seeing. He leaves. The dish goes back home with him. It keeps its opinion to itself, but only barely. The food critics have noticed all of this. Craig Claiborne, writing in the New York Times, treats the TV dinner with the same calm, airless disdain he reserves for things he'd rather not have to acknowledge exist. James Beard does not acknowledge it at all, which is its own acknowledgement. They understand correctly that something has reorganized. They're wrong about what it means, or at least about who's being lost, because the family eating in front of the screen isn't abandoning dinner. They're eating hot food, all at once, without a 45-minute production involving every pot in the kitchen. The meal happened. It's happening right now, in front of them. The table doesn't disappear, of course. It's still there for Sunday, it's still there for holidays, for company, for the nights when appearances are being maintained. It functions as a kind of formal portrait, the family as it wishes to be understood, assembled around the good silverware, eating slow, careful, and genuinely effortful food that took real time. But 5 nights out of 7, the aluminum tray wins. The table absorbs this gracefully. Tables have weathered worse. What shifts, and this is the part nobody discusses in the advertisements, is that the meal is no longer a negotiation. You've already agreed, by sitting down in front of the screen with your tray, that this hour belongs to the program. You're not going to fight through the dressing about school. You're going to watch Ed Sullivan introduce someone you've never heard of, eat your pre-sliced turkey, and let the evening make its own decisions. There's something to be said for that. Nobody is entirely sure what it is, but there's something. You set a tray in front of your child, and your child immediately approves of one specific feature. Nothing is touching anything else. The turkey stays in its compartment. The sweet potato stays in its compartment. The dressing keeps to its corner like a guest who doesn't know anyone at the party. For a child who has spent years waging war against foods that dare to mingle on a plate, this aluminum tray is a peace treaty drawn up by the food industry itself. Each item is sovereign. Each border is respected. Dinner for once is diplomatically arranged. But there's something else going on with the child and the TV dinner, and it has less to do with compartments than with occasion. Your child mostly encounters this meal on a specific kind of night, the kind where you and your spouse are putting on coats near the front door while a teenage girl named Patty stands in the hallway holding her purse, slightly uncertain of the stove. The TV dinner is not an ordinary Tuesday. It is a Tuesday that has been promoted. There's a babysitter. There are no rules about posture. The television is already on. The tray, in this context, has the faintly forbidden glamour of a field trip lunch. Patty slides the tray out of the oven with a dish towel doubled over because the aluminum has been sitting in 425 degrees for 28 minutes and has strong opinions about bare hands. She sets it on the TV tray stand with the careful precision of someone who has been told once firmly not to spill it. Your child leans forward. Steam rises first from the gravy compartment. Then the whole thing opens up, turkey fat and sage and something institutional, warm in a way that is specific to this meal and nothing else. The sweet potato in the small left compartment has gone soft and wet, the way only a freeze-thaw cycle can arrange, like the concept of a sweet potato rendered in paste form. Nobody mentions this. Your child eats it first. Now, why the compartments work on children in a way they don't quite work on adults? A grown person knows, intellectually, that gravy touching dressing isn't a structural crisis. A child has not yet accepted this. The mingling of foods on a plate represents a sudden, total, and deeply personal loss of categorical control that some children feel at a frequency adults stopped hearing years ago. Swanson didn't design the three-compartment tray for children specifically. Betty Cronin designed it around the thermal problem of getting 3 different mass densities to finish cooking at the same time. The child appeal was a side effect, a very profitable one. By the late 1950s, Swanson formalized the relationship. The fun feast arrived, same aluminum tray, 4 compartments now, the 4th holding an apple cobbler about the size of a hockey puck. It was a Lunchable invented 30 years early and aimed at the entire family, except the cobbler was warm and came out of an oven and left a small caramelized ring on the aluminum that your child would try to eat with a spoon. The 4th compartment changed something. It made the tray feel less like a rearranged dinner and more like an event with a conclusion. Meanwhile, on the nights this isn't a babysitter occasion, on the nights you're simply tired and the kitchen feels very far away, the child's response to the TV dinner carries a different charge. There's no glamour in it then, it's just dinner. Small portions sized to child appetites, food sealed from one another, a tray that's done in half an hour. Your child eats without comment, watching whatever is on. The compartments do their job, nothing touches, the dressing keeps to its corner. It's a remarkably low-conflict meal, which at 7:45 on a Wednesday is not nothing. You are putting on your good coat, and your children are watching you do it, and they already know what this means for dinner. You are going out. A teenage girl from down the street is coming to sit with them, and she will not be cooking anything, because in the freezer there are trays with their names on them, more or less. For your children, this is not a lesser dinner. It is an event. The frozen tray, served on a night when the parents leave and the rules go soft, has a faint glamour to it that no home-cooked roast could ever manage. The babysitter, let's call her Diane, because her name is almost certainly Diane, arrives in her saddle shoes and does not remove her jacket for the first 20 minutes because the house feels different when the parents are gone, and she isn't entirely sure yet what kind of evening this is going to be. Your youngest is already at the freezer. Your oldest is explaining to nobody in particular that last time they got to eat in the living room, which is both true and a negotiating position. Diane pulls the trays out. They come out cold as stone tablets, stiff-cornered, each one sealed in its illustrated box, the grey-blue screen in the dark frame, the promise of television printed directly onto the packaging. She sets the oven to 425 degrees. She puts the trays in. She and your children then do the only logical thing. They go watch television. Nobody is monitoring the situation. The oven is monitoring the situation. This is where the evening arranges itself into something your children will remember for the rest of their lives as better than it probably was. The kitchen fills, around minute 20, with the smell of turkey fat and sage dressing. It saturates the whole house with a warm, specific, and unmistakably institutional cloud. The television is loud. Diane has her feet on the coffee table, which she would not do if you were home, and your children have noticed this and are filing it away. The trays come out at minute 27, hot enough that Diane wraps her sleeve over her hand, because the oven mitt is somewhere your children cannot locate. She carries the trays to the TV trays, the fold-out metal stands that live behind the couch and only come out for occasions, and sets one in front of each child with the seriousness of a short-order cook who has decided tonight she runs a good kitchen. The compartments steam. Each item steams separately in its own lane, which is the whole point. The turkey is in the big section. The cornbread dressing has crisped at the edges and gone slightly gummy in the center, because Betty Cronin's thermal calculations were very good but not perfect, and your oven runs a little hot. Your youngest will not eat the sweet potato if it touches the turkey. It hasn't touched the turkey. It has never touched the turkey. The tray was designed by someone who understood, at a cellular level, this exact child's exact objection. The compartment wall holds. Dinner proceeds without incident, which is the highest possible rating a babysitter night meal can receive. By the late 1950s, Swanson added a fourth compartment, a small square at the corner of the tray holding an apple cobbler or a brownie, sealed under its own foil section. Your children called this the fun feast. They ate the cobbler first. Diane allowed it, because Diane was 17, and the rules of the house were, at this point, purely theoretical. The cobbler was warm in some places and room temperature in others, and sweet in the aggressive way that only institutional desserts manage. Nobody complained. The television was still on. The tray sat empty on the fold-out stand, holding its shape, the compartment walls still clean because nothing had crossed them. You come home at 10:15. Your children are asleep, or performing sleep. The trays are in the trash, bent slightly where someone pushed them flat. The house smells like rendered poultry and a good evening. Diane gets $2 and her jacket. You bring home the children's version, the one with a fourth compartment, and the fourth compartment is the entire point. Swanson has added a small square of dessert, an apple cobbler, a brownie, something sweet and slightly suspicious, to the standard 3, and your children have noticed this development with the focus of stockbrokers. Everything else on the tray is now simply an obstacle. The dessert sits in its corner, gleaming faintly, a reward held hostage behind a wall of sweet potato. You explain that the turkey comes first. The negotiations begin immediately. The cobbler. Now, it's not really a cobbler. It's a cobbler-adjacent situation, a shallow depression of softened apple in a paste of something that was once crumbly and is now merely committed to the tray. It has survived being frozen solid, stored in a supermarket chest freezer below a bag of peas, driven home in the back seat, and cooked at 425 degrees for 28 minutes. It is still here. It has opinions about perseverance. Your children consider it the finest, rarest, and most important food in the house. Swanson introduced the fun feast in the late 1950s, and the name is doing a lot of work. The fun is the fourth compartment. The feast is the other 3. Your child has already mapped a strategy. A single, performative bite of sweet potato, eye contact, a pause for applause that doesn't arrive, then a long look toward the cobbler. The sweet potato, for its part, has gone soft and damp in the way that only freezing can achieve, not cooked soft, but something closer to quietly defeated. It doesn't taste bad. It tastes like it used to taste better, and knows it. The compartments are doing something useful here, beyond the obvious engineering of keeping the gravy off the dressing. Children have very strong feelings about food touching other food, feelings that are irrational, deeply held, and completely non-negotiable, which is basically the same logic that runs a Senate committee, but smaller. The 3-way division was always part of the appeal for anyone under 10. The fourth compartment is the masterpiece. Swanson has, essentially, put the carrot at the end of the stick and then packaged the carrot as a brownie. Meanwhile, across the table, you're realizing that the fun feast has made your job harder. A standard TV dinner had no leverage. You ate it or you didn't. The fun feast has introduced a hostage situation with a dessert-shaped hostage, and your 7-year-old has a better grasp of the terms than you do. Your son Marcus pushes a piece of turkey to one side with a fork, then looks up with the measured patience of someone who has done this before and plans to do it again. He takes a very precise half-bite of cornbread dressing. He sets the fork down. He folds his hands. You eat your own dinner, which is the adult version, with no cobbler, no fourth compartment, no negotiating position whatsoever. The turkey tastes like it was assembled by someone who had read a description of turkey and done their best. The gravy is warm and starchy and present in the way gravy always is, not actively bad, just filling in the places where flavour used to be. The dressing has sage in it. You can tell because the smell arrived in the kitchen 6 minutes before dinner was ready and has not left yet. The aluminum tray is still hot. You pick it up on one side and immediately set it back down. This is a lesson you've learned before. The tray remembers 425 degrees longer than you'd expect, and the edges are the worst of it. overcooked and slightly crisped where the foil collected heat, while the center of the turkey still carried a faint, cool note at the start. Betty Cronin spent months trying to solve that problem. It is somewhat solved, not fully solved, partially managed. Your son Marcus eats the cobbler first because you look away for 30 seconds. It is gone before you turn back. He has the expression of someone who cannot be held responsible for events that occurred while you weren't watching. You consider the remaining sweet potato on his tray. You consider the evening ahead. You let it go. You finish eating, and now you do something that would have been unthinkable in your mother's kitchen. You throw the plate away. The tray is designed to be discarded, used once and dropped in the bin, and you were raised through a depression that treated waste as a kind of sin. Some part of you wants to wash it, to keep it, to find a use for a perfectly good piece of metal. You don't. You drop it in the trash and feel, very faintly, like you are getting away with something you shouldn't. Consider what that tray actually is. It's surplus. The aluminum in your hand came out of a wartime production chain built to make aircraft, bombers, transports, fighters, and when the war ended, the smelters kept running because stopping is expensive. The industry needed somewhere to put the metal. Packaging was the answer. The tray that held your turkey dinner is, in a quiet way, a repurposed piece of military infrastructure. You threw away a B-17 component. Not large, but related. Your mother kept everything. Coffee cans held buttons, then nails, then a careful, golden and faintly rancid layer of bacon drippings. Wax paper was folded and reused until it was translucent with age. Rubber bands came off the newspaper and went into a drawer that also held string and a candle and things whose original purpose nobody could remember. The Depression taught a whole generation that objects had obligations, and one use wasn't enough to discharge them. The tray disagrees. The tray has no opinion about any of this. It's already in the bin, cooling off, slightly greasy. This is where the critics arrive. Food writers and domestic commentators had been watching the frozen dinner market with the specific energy of someone who smells something wrong but can't locate the source. Craig Claiborne and James Beard had opinions. They always had opinions, and the opinions were not favourable. The concern wasn't really the food, though they had concerns about the food. The concern was what throwing the plate away said about you, about the country, about what dinner meant and whether meaning was now optional. A single aluminum tray in a wastebasket stood in, for a certain kind of critic, for everything that had gone soft and convenient and morally unserious about modern American life. Missus. Patricia Holloway, the food columnist for a mid-sized Ohio paper, writes that the TV dinner represents a failure of domestic commitment so complete that future generations will look back and mark the moment. She writes this in 1956. She writes it in a column next to an advertisement for a gelatin mold that contains suspended olives. The irony doesn't register at the time. Of course, nobody asked the women doing the cooking. The Michigan Time Use surveys from the decade show housewives averaging 90 minutes a day on meal preparation and cleanup, but that average includes the night someone opened a frozen tray and the night someone made a roast that took the whole afternoon. Convenience was not replacing cooking, it was compressed into the gaps. The woman throwing the tray away on a Tuesday night is making pot roast on Saturday, and nobody is writing columns about the pot roast. The tray itself gets the last word by being indestructible. You can't burn aluminum at home oven temperatures. You can warp it slightly if you forget it. One of the workers at the Omaha plant, Marie, used to say the rejected trays looked like something had disagreed with them from the inside. But it doesn't decay, doesn't rust, doesn't apologize. It sits in the bin looking exactly like what it is. A piece of engineering that worked once, exactly as intended, and has no further interest in your feelings about it. And yet, the guilt is real. Not large guilt, not serious guilt. The small, slightly ridiculous guilt of a person who was told things about waste and thrift and is now living in a suburb with a 2-car garage and a television and a meal that came out of a box shaped like the television, eating it on a folding tray made by Samsonite, throwing the whole thing away when finished. Your mother would have something to say. She would keep the tray. She would find a use for it by April. You stand at the freezer chest and you must choose, because by 1955 there is no longer just one company that makes these things. Swanson is the famous one, the original, priced accordingly. But there is Banquet sitting beside it, 10 or 15 cents cheaper, watching you do the arithmetic. There is Morton, newer, eager. The choice you make says something quiet about your household budget, and you know it, and the other women leaning into the same freezer chest know it too. You reach for one. Everyone pretends not to notice which. Banquet then. Banquet entered the market in 1954 with a straightforward proposition. Same idea, less money, no apologies. The packaging doesn't have the grey-blue television screen design, it doesn't have Swanson's name recognition or its 10 million dinners story. What it has is a price point that fits inside your weekly grocery envelope without requiring a moment of calculation. The turkey inside is compressed the same way. The sweet potato softens in exactly the same way. The sodium content is making the same aggressive case it always makes. For 10 cents less, you have committed no meaningful act of compromise. You have simply done arithmetic. Morton sits a little differently in the chest. Morton TV dinners arrived in 1954 as well, and Morton has ambitions. The packaging is slightly brighter, the typeface a little more optimistic, the whole object radiating the energy of a new employee who has read the company handbook twice. A woman named Dolores, who lives 3 houses down and has very firm opinions about everything, always reaches past Swanson directly to Morton. She does this without comment. She does this in a way that is not aggressive but is somehow still a position. Then there is Stoffers. Stoffers is not playing the same game at all. Stoffers comes in a foil tray with a different kind of customer in mind, someone who would like you to know they considered other options before arriving here. The Stouffer's box is less television-shaped and more restaurant-adjacent, which is a distinction that costs you approximately 30 cents. Craig Claiborne, writing in the New York Times, had opinions about all of these. His opinions were not warm. The sales numbers were not reading his column. By 1955, there are at least a dozen brands and roughly $30 million in retail frozen dinner sales nationally. The chest freezer aisle is no longer a curiosity. It is a section. The supermarket has 25,000 of its own locations across the country by now, and each one has an open-top chest with a frost-misted lid that leaves a chill on your fingertips when you reach down through the cold air. The packages at the bottom of the chest feel like cold stone. The ones near the top have frost on their corners from being disturbed by everyone else making their same quiet calculation before you. The compartment counts vary slightly by brand, and the portion sizes drift in ways that the packaging photographs do not fully prepare you for. Swanson runs its tray at roughly 11 by 7 inches. Banquet runs slightly smaller. The sweet potato portion is about the size of a deck of cards before the freezer shrinks it further. The dressing sits in its own compartment, holding its shape with the resignation of something that has accepted its fate. The gravy, which does most of the sensory work, steams off first when the tray comes out of the oven and announces the entire meal to anyone standing in the kitchen. The brands smell roughly the same at minute 25. Sage, thyme, rendered turkey fat, something starchy, and underneath it all, faint and persistent, the metallic note that a few people blame on the tray and the rest pretend not to notice. The price difference between brands is not large in absolute terms. It is large in signal. You are in a suburb built in the last 5 years, in a house with a new refrigerator and a television and a set of TV tray stands you bought in a set of 4 from the hardware store. Everything is new. Everything is also being paid for on a schedule. You've been the woman who reaches for Stouffer's and the woman who reaches for Banquet, and they are not different lives. They are the same life at slightly different margins, and the freezer chest is where that margin becomes visible for approximately 4 seconds before you go back to looking at the frozen peas. You have people coming over, and you have made a decision that costs slightly more, because tonight you are reaching for Stouffer's. This is the frozen dinner that has decided it is too sophisticated for the television set box. It comes in a plain foil package, it skips the child-friendly compartments, and it is priced to remind you that it is the better sort of convenience. Serving it to guests is a small performance. You are saying without saying it that you are the kind of hostess who knows the difference. You slide it from the foil and arrange it on a real plate. The plate is doing a lot of work tonight. It transforms the foil tray into a considered meal. The serving dish follows, because you own a serving dish, and you would like that to be known. Your neighbour Dorothy sets her table the same way every Sunday. Real linen, real plates, a casserole she spent 40 minutes on, and what you are doing right now is adjacent to that. Not identical, adjacent. Consider the arrangement. Stouffer's macaroni and cheese comes out looking remarkably coherent for something that was a frozen block 40 minutes ago. The surface has browned at the edges in a way that implies effort. The center is creamy. This is, on a technical level, an achievement. Getting a bechamel to survive a freeze-thaw cycle without separating into its component sadnesses requires real food chemistry, and the Stouffer's people have done the work. The result sits on your plate looking like a warm, browned, and entirely intentional thing someone made on purpose. Which someone did. Just not you. Just not tonight. Your guest Margaret tips her head and says it looks lovely, in the tone people use when they mean it and also when they don't. And both of you understand that the geography of the compliment is ambiguous. You accept it graciously. You've set out a bread basket. The bread basket is not frozen. You'd like that acknowledged too, but nobody is going to say it. The Staffers line priced itself above banquet, above Morton, and carefully below the idea of actual cooking, which is a position requiring significant nerve to maintain. It's the premium option in a category that food critics had already decided was beneath comment. James Beard, who had opinions about everything and was correct about most of them, treated the frozen dinner as a symptom. Stauffer's response to this was to charge more and say nothing. The strategy worked. Now, the flavour. It's good. That's the slightly uncomfortable part. The macaroni is soft in the way macaroni should be soft. The cheese sauce has depth, real cheese, not powdered, present in enough quantity to justify the price difference. The salt is there, doing its usual job of filling the space where freshness isn't, but it's doing it more quietly than the Swanson tray, which addresses sodium with the confidence of someone who has stopped caring what you think. Stauffer's is restrained. The salt whispers. You notice it only after the third bite. Margaret has a second helping, which settles the question of the evening. A second helping from a guest is the only food review that counts. You make a note, mental, not written, that Stauffer's is the brand you keep for company and Banquet is the brand you keep for Tuesdays, when nobody is watching. The distinction matters to you. It would probably matter less if you said it out loud, so you don't. The foil tray sits in the kitchen, folded twice because folding it once doesn't feel complete. You'll throw it away after everyone leaves. There's still a faint trace of cheese on the rim of the tray, going cool and opaque now, and the tray itself is already losing its structural opinions and collapsing gently into the shape of the trash bin. The serving dish goes back in the cabinet. The plate goes in the sink. The linen goes on the chair. The bread basket, which nobody mentioned, goes on the counter. You were a good hostess tonight. The bread helped. You open Good Housekeeping at the kitchen table, and the magazine has opinions about the dinner you served last night. Every issue arrives full of elaborate recipes and gentle, smiling instruction on what a devoted wife puts in front of her family. And none of those recipes involve a frozen aluminum tray. The articles never accuse you directly. They simply describe, in warm and glowing detail, the multi-hour meal a truly loving woman would have made. You read it with the frozen dinner box still in the trash, lid not quite closed. The magazine knows nothing about your evening. It judges it anyway. Now, the Good Housekeeping seal of approval. It's not a seal. It's a small red oval printed on products that have passed testing by the magazine's institute, and it functions as a kind of domestic report card issued to the objects in your home. A toaster can earn it. A floor wax can earn it. Your dinner cannot. The seal doesn't appear on aluminum trays, and this absence is its own kind of sentence. The magazine has a department called the Good Housekeeping Institute, which tests kitchen appliances and publishes results in measured, encouraging language that nonetheless leaves no room for interpretation. A woman named Dorothy on page 47 has just made a boeuf bourguignon from scratch on a Tuesday. Dorothy appears to have also ironed her blouse. Her kitchen is visible in the photograph. It is spotless. Dorothy is smiling in the direction of someone off-camera, presumably her family, who is receiving this beurre bourguignon, as if it were a reasonable Tuesday. You are not Dorothy. Nobody is Dorothy. Dorothy is a photograph. Of course, it isn't only Good Housekeeping. Better Homes and Gardens arrives the same week. Ladies' Home Journal arrives the week after. Each one is full of slow, fresh, and frankly accusatory recipes. Casseroles assembled from fresh ingredients, beef stroganoff with actual cream, pies whose crusts were made by hand. The cumulative message, delivered cheerfully and without pause across 12 issues a year, is that convenience is fine for someone, just not for a woman who takes her family's health and happiness seriously. You take your family's health and happiness seriously. You also have a job, a school pickup at 3:15, and a casserole dish you've been meaning to wash since Thursday. The food critics are even less subtle. Craig Claiborne writes in the New York Times as if the TV dinner is a category of moral collapse rather than a product category. James Beard, who by this point has made a career of having opinions about your kitchen, does not call the aluminum tray by name, but the parameters he draws around acceptable cooking exclude it the way a velvet rope excludes someone who arrived in the wrong shoes. The velvet rope is made of butter. Swanson does not advertise in Good Housekeeping. Swanson advertises on television during the exact programming you've been eating in front of, and the advertisement shows a smiling woman taking a tray out of the oven, not placing a roast on a table. The distinction is precise. The woman in the Swanson advertisement has also managed to look relaxed. Her oven mitt fits. This is genuinely aspirational. A woman named Patricia, who lives 4 houses down, brings a covered dish to the neighborhood potluck and mentions she made it herself. And the phrase herself carries an inflection you recognize immediately. It means, unlike some people, the covered dish is a chicken casserole and it's fine. Patricia has also been known to serve iceberg lettuce with bottled dressing as a salad course while maintaining full eye contact. But the covered dish counts. It counts in a way the tray does not. The magazines photograph their recipes from above, usually, or at a 3/4 angle that shows the height of a properly browned crust. The aluminum tray doesn't photograph well. It's too flat. The compartments stay separate in a way that looks sterile under a flashbulb. The sweet potato, which lost its structure somewhere between the factory freezer and your oven, would not hold a shape in a magazine photograph. The sweet potato has no magazine ambitions. It knows what it is. You close. Good Housekeeping. The seal of approval on the refrigerator deodorizer on page 62 catches the light for a moment. You have that deodorizer. It works fine. The magazine approved it. The magazine remains agnostic about the rest of your week. You hear your husband's car in the driveway, and you perform a small, practiced maneuver. You make the box disappear. Down into the trash it goes, turned screen side down, tucked beneath something else. The dinner is heating in the oven and filling the kitchen with a smell that is more or less convincing, and you would prefer that he experience the result without examining the method. It isn't quite lying. It's curation. You smooth your apron, you check the clock, and you arrange your face into the calm, tired, and faintly virtuous expression of a woman who has been cooking all afternoon. The smell is doing a reasonable amount of work. By minute 25, the gravy steam has come first, then the rendered turkey fat, then the sage thyme onion cloud of the dressing, and the whole kitchen has taken on a warm, institutional note that is somewhere between a church potluck and a school cafeteria. Not bad, not exactly a Sunday roast, but convincingly hot, which is doing most of the heavy lifting tonight. Consider what comes out of the oven. The tray will leave a mark if you grab it wrong, and Dolores, who lives 2 doors down and has the small scar to prove it, grabs it wrong every single time. The edges of the turkey are dry, slightly crisped, pulling away from the gravy that has thickened and darkened at the corners. The center is warm. The sweet potato is soft the way ice crystals leave a vegetable soft. Nothing to do with roasting. Everything to do with what the freezer did to it on the way over. The turkey itself is pre-sliced and pressed, closer to a pressed deli slice than to anything that once had opinions about the farmyard. You serve it anyway. The oven has done what it can. The salt is also doing its part, covering the flat, muted flavors that freezing and reheating leave behind. The tray has no nutrition label. The box has a television on it. These are the available facts. Your husband comes in and says it smells good in here. You agree that it does. He doesn't ask what you made. This is, you have found, the most reliable feature of the entire system. He sits down, the TV trays are already out, the folding metal stands Samsonite sold you in a set of 4, the ones that rattle slightly when someone sets a glass down too hard, and the first act of whatever is on is still running. This is not an accident. Swanson studied the primetime schedule when they settled on 25 to 30 minutes. Dinner finishes at a natural break. The oven is basically a countdown timer calibrated to I Love Lucy, and it has never missed its cue. None of this is what the magazines had in mind. Good Housekeeping's version of tonight involved braised something and a homemade something else, and a clean kitchen that never smelled like a factory broke in. James Beard, if he were here, would need a moment. He is not here. What is here is a tray of hot food, a husband who is satisfied, a clock that says 7:45, and a piece of aluminum in the trash that is keeping its own counsel. The tray, incidentally, bothers certain people. Not the flavour, not the sodium, not the pressed turkey texture, the tray itself. Throwing it away. In a culture raised on Depression-era thrift, where nothing with further utility was ever discarded, a purpose-built disposable container reads as a small moral statement, and the statement is not a welcome one. Your mother, if she saw it, would retrieve it from the trash and wash it. She would find a use. She always finds a use. You covered it with something else specifically because of this. The children, for their part, have no complaints. The compartments appeal to them in a way that no amount of careful plating ever has. Each item separate, contained, not touching anything it wasn't meant to touch, which is basically a Lunchable invented 30 years early and aimed at the whole family. They eat everything in the tray. They leave nothing. They ask if there's more. There isn't more. There is, however, a second tray in the freezer for next Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that, each one waiting in the cold dark of the Kelvinator with the patient confidence of a thing that knows exactly what it is. You are not at home in this one. You are at the Swanson plant in Omaha, on the line, and the first thing you learn here is that the room is kept below freezing on purpose. You wear heavy gloves, insulated boots, and several layers of clothing, and you handle cold trays for hours at a pay rate of about $1.10. The food must stay frozen, which means you must stay frozen alongside it. Your breaks are spent in a heated room off the floor, thawing, before you go back out into the cold to do it again. Most of the people on the line with you are women. Not because the work is considered light, it isn't, but because the pay is low enough that the plant doesn't attract anyone with better options. $1.10 an hour in 1953 is not nothing. It is also not much. The annual turnover runs somewhere around 30 to 40%, which means roughly a third of your co-workers will be gone before next Thanksgiving. The plant replaces them, the trays keep moving. Here is what you actually do. You stand at a conveyor at a pace the belt sets for you, and the belt has no opinion about your back, your fingers, or how cold you were an hour ago. Trays come past. You fill a compartment, turkey here, dressing there, sweet potato and the small one on the side. The amounts are standardized. Betty Cronin figured out the portions after months of oven temperature math, and now those portions travel down the line at the speed the belt decides. Doris, 2 stations ahead of you, shakes the ladle over the gravy compartment without looking up. She has the wrist motion of someone who has done this 800 times today. She probably has. The cold is the thing nobody mentions in the advertisements. The tray in your gloved hand is cold enough to register through the insulation. By hour 3, your feet are doing that thing where they stopped being cold and started just being far away. The heated break room is 10 degrees warmer than the floor, which makes it feel warm, generous, and frankly tropical, like a spa. It is not a spa. It has folding chairs and a coffee urn that has been running since 5 in the morning and has developed opinions about what coffee should taste like. Outside the plant, 10 refrigerated rail cars are still moving. The turkey from the Great Autumn Surplus, all 260 tons of it, has mostly been processed by now, portioned and pressed and sealed into its aluminum compartments, but the logistics don't stop just because the crisis resolved itself. Refrigerated freight has its own rhythm. The cold chain runs from the plant to the warehouse to the truck to the chest freezer at the supermarket, and every link in it requires someone working in the cold for wages that assume you don't have a better offer. The trays, once filled and sealed, go into a blast freezer that drops the temperature fast, the same principle Clarence Birdseye learned from watching Inuit fishermen in Labrador 40 years earlier. Small ice crystals, less cellular damage. The turkey that emerges is turkey that will still look like turkey in February, which is a low bar that flash freezing clears with some room to spare. Whether it tastes like turkey is a separate question, and one the sodium content is enlisted to answer. The finished trays move into cold storage and wait. Somewhere in a suburb 2 states away, a living room is being organized around a television set. The TV tray stands are already set up, 4 of them in a set, folded flat against the wall until needed. The oven will preheat to 425 degrees at a time, calibrated to a commercial break. What sits between that living room and this moment is the line, and the belt, and the heated break room, and Doris with her ladle, and your hands in their heavy gloves. And the cold that neither of you is really thinking about anymore because you stopped thinking about it around Tuesday. You are Betty Cronin, more or less, and you have been handed a problem that sounds simple and isn't. make 3 different foods become hot at the same moment. Turkey with gravy, cornbread dressing, sweet potato, each one freezes differently, thaws differently, and burns differently. And the home oven is set to 425 degrees with no patience for any of it. If the turkey is ready, the potato is cold. If the potato is ready, the turkey is leather. You stand in the test kitchen with a notebook and a stopwatch, and you begin, tray after tray, to solve it. The sweet potato is the first problem. It's a wet vegetable, dense with water, already inclined toward mushiness before a freezer ever touches it. The freeze-thaw cycle does to sweet potato what a heavy rainstorm does to a cardboard box. By the time it's hot, it has become something soft and anonymous, the color of an apology. You write down the compartment depth. You adjust it. You run the tray again. The turkey is the second problem, and the harder one. It's already been pre-sliced and pressed on the factory floor, a decision made upstream that you didn't make but must now accommodate. What goes into the tray is not carved poultry. It's a flattened, reformed approximation of carved poultry, which behaves in the oven more like a very formal cold cut than like anything that was recently a bird. It also sits in gravy, which heats at a different rate than meat, which heats at a different rate than bone, except there is no bone anymore, which is part of the problem. You adjust the well depth on the large compartment. You run the tray again. The dressing is the third problem, and the quietest one. It burns on the edges before the center catches up, which is the oven's way of expressing opinions about cornbread. A worker named Ruth on the test kitchen staff, who tucks a pencil behind each ear and only uses the left one, slides another tray in and starts the stopwatch without being asked. You don't look up. You write, shallower. You run the tray again. Here is what you're actually trying to hit. 3 foods all edible in the same 2-minute window, which a housewife will open after pulling a tray from a 425-degree oven with a double dish towel because the packaging will be too hot to touch through a single layer of cotton. The tray itself retains heat unevenly. The aluminum corners cool first. The center of the large compartment stays hot longest. You account for this. You write it down. You run the tray again. The sodium question arrives sideways. Freezing flattens flavor the way a phone call flattens a conversation. Technically, the information transfers, but something essential has already left. Salt covers this. A lot of salt. Enough of it to matter at a time when nobody was required to put that number anywhere visible. You add it because without it, the turkey tastes like a memory of turkey, faint and slightly defensive. By the time the formula is right, you've gone through somewhere north of 100 trial trays. The cook time settles at 25 to 30 minutes at 425 degrees, not because that's the elegant solution, but because it's the survivable one. The window in which all 3 compartments are simultaneously in the range of acceptable. The turkey won't be succulent, the sweet potato won't be vibrant, the dressing will be serviceable, but they'll all be hot at once, which was the assignment, and the assignment is now done. Later, the marketing team will call the 2 5 to 3 0-minute window clever timing. From the bench, it's just physics. How long it takes pressed turkey and soft sweet potato to reach the same temperature in a small aluminum tray. The oven doesn't know who Ed Sullivan is. The oven knows 425 degrees, a shallow well, and a compressed slab of poultry that used to be a bird. The tray, when it finally comes out, is too hot to hold. Ruth sets it on the counter with tongs. Steam rises from the gravy first. Then the dressing smell, warm, herbal, and faintly industrial, fills the test kitchen like it has intentions. You pick up your pencil, you write down the time. It's right. You are a Swanson salesman named Jerry Thomas, and you are about to tell a story that you will be telling for the rest of your life. The way you tell it, you saw the 3 compartment trays that Pan American used to feed passengers on airplanes, and something clicked, and you sketched the idea for the frozen dinner right there. Whether it happened exactly that way is a question other people will argue about for decades, mostly after you are no longer around to defend your version. But for now, the sketch is yours, the story is yours, and the credit, for the moment, is yours alone. The airplane tray, then. It's not a tray. It's an alibi with a divider. Pan American did use 3-compartment trays for in-flight meals in the early 1950s, which is a fact that exists independently of whether Jerry Thomas ever looked at one and had a revelation. The compartments kept the meal portions separated. Protein here, starch there. Something soft and orange in the 3rd section, Because airplane food has always understood that visual organization is doing roughly 40% of the work. You're 30,000 feet up and slightly dehydrated, and the tray is telling you this is dinner, because it looks like dinner has been sorted. The tray has done its job before you've eaten anything. Jerry's insight, credited or not, was recognizing that same logic worked at sea level. The compartment isn't just a physical separator, it's a promise. This section will be turkey, that section will be dressing. You will not open the oven to find a grey unified mass that used to be several distinct foods. The compartment is accountability, stamped into aluminum. Of course, Betty Cronin's team spent months figuring out how to make the contents of those compartments actually behave. That story belongs to a different room in the same building. Jerry Thomas's story belongs to a sales call and a sketch and a test order. The test order was 5,000 units. That number is worth sitting with for a moment. Swanson had 260 tons of turkey on 10 rail cars circling the country. 5,000 dinners used a small fraction of that turkey, a rounding error with gravy. Management signed off on 5,000 because 5,000 felt like a reasonable experiment. It felt like the kind of number that didn't embarrass anyone if it failed. A woman named Doris Henke, working the packaging line at the Omaha plant, later recalled the first production run coming through in late 1953. She said the trays came down the line and everyone kept expecting to be told what they were for. Nobody explained the television part. The tray just arrived, divided, and needed filling. Swanson sold 10 million in the first year. That is not a typo. 5,000 units ordered as a test. 10 million units sold. The math does not get more dramatic than that, and the math does not require dramatic language. 10 million is just what happened. After 10 million units, the airplane tray anecdote stops being a sales pitch and becomes the origin, quoted in newspaper profiles, repeated at trade association dinners, eventually told to a journalist who writes it down and makes it permanent. You tell it again at a sales lunch in Cincinnati, it gets a little smoother each time. Betty Cronin, who had solved the actual thermal problem of getting 3 foods to simultaneously edible temperatures from frozen in a home oven, received no patent and filed no trademark. She gave interviews. Her colleagues gave interviews, mostly after 2005, mostly to correct the record, mostly when Jerry was no longer in the room. Her name is not on the box. The box, for its part, has its own story. A grey-blue rectangle framed in dark ink, designed to look like a television set, which is basically a billboard you cook, except the only thing it's selling is the instruction to stop talking to your family and start reheating. The box knows what it's for. The box has always known. You work for Swanson in the autumn of 1953, and the company has a problem riding around the country on a train. After Thanksgiving, there are 260 tons of turkey that nobody bought, frozen solid, and there is nowhere to put it. So it has been loaded onto 10 refrigerated railroad cars, which are now simply driving back and forth across the United States, keeping the turkey cold, while everyone upstairs tries to think of what on earth to do with it. The turkey is touring the nation. It has no destination. It is just staying frozen, expensively, until someone has an idea. 260 tons is a small mountain of compressed, frozen, and faintly embarrassing poultry circling the continent on railway infrastructure, accumulating refrigeration costs by the hour because Thanksgiving came and went and America just didn't buy enough turkey. The cars keep moving because stopping means finding somewhere to park them, and there is nowhere to park 260 tons of bird that isn't eating into your margin even faster than the diesel already is. This is where a salesman named Jerry Thomas enters the room with an idea, though he will argue about whose idea it was for the next 50 years. The pitch is simple. Portion the turkey, add sides, freeze it in a tray, and aim it at the living rooms now filling up with televisions. Swanson has the turkey, America has the screens. Someone just needs to connect the two, which is basically the founding logic of every tech startup, except the product is gravy. The person who actually makes the turkey edible in this scenario is Betty Cronin. She's a home economist at Swanson, which in 1953 means she is handed a physics problem disguised as a recipe. Her job is to get turkey with gravy, cornbread dressing, and sweet potato all to reach proper eating temperature simultaneously, starting from frozen in a home oven set to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. These things do not want to do this. Sweet potato holds heat differently than pressed poultry. Dressing has the thermal personality of wet cement. The turkey wants to overcook at the edges before the center is committed to any particular temperature. Betty Cronin solves this. The record does not spend much time on how. Meanwhile, the tray itself has a geometry. The largest compartment holds the turkey in gravy, pre-sliced, compressed, with a texture closer to a very serious cold cut than anything that once walked around a farm. The two smaller compartments hold the sweet potato and the cornbread dressing. The whole thing measures roughly 11 by 7 inches, which is exactly the size of something you balance on your knees while watching television if you have been given no other options. A supervisor named Gerald Lemke reviews the compartment specifications and adjusts one side wall by 3 millimeters, then writes nothing down about this. The tray does not acknowledge his contribution. The sweet potato, for what it's worth, has been through a lot by the time it reaches you. The long freeze does something to sweet potato that can only be described as earnest. It softens, it gives in. It accepts the tray, the oven, and the whole arrangement, like it always knew this was how things would end. It's not bad. It's not good. It is simply what sweet potato becomes when it has accepted its fate inside an aluminum compartment at 425 degrees. The cook time, 25 to 30 minutes, is not accidental. Swanson's team studied the television schedules, specifically the evening lineup running from 7 to 10, and aimed the oven timer to land dinner at a natural pause in programming. You preheat the oven, slide the tray in, and by the time the first act resolves, steam is rising from the gravy compartment, and the kitchen smells of rendered turkey fat and sage. With a faint metallic undertone the tray declines to apologize for. It's basically Netflix autoplay, except the countdown runs backward and ends with something that will burn your fingers if you pick up the tray without a cloth. You get a dinner home, you open the box, and you can tell immediately that something went wrong somewhere between the factory and your freezer. The package is soft in a way it shouldn't be. There is frost crusted in the wrong places, the telltale signature of food that thawed a little, somewhere warm, and then froze again. The cold chain that carried this tray from Omaha to your supermarket runs through trucks and warehouses and loading docks, and any weak link in it ends up here, in your hands, on a Tuesday. You consider the package. You decide whether to trust it. The cold chain is long. Swanson's plant runs at below freezing temperatures through the entire packing process. The workers in insulated boots and heavy gloves and 3 layers of everything, taking breaks in heated rooms off the floor the way other people take breaks outside. The turkey goes into the tray cold, the gravy goes in cold. The sweet potato, already softened by its first freeze, goes in cold. The whole aluminum package gets sealed and blast chilled and loaded onto a truck and sent somewhere, and somewhere it might wait a little too long next to a warm dock door, and the frost pattern shifts, and by the time you're holding it, the evidence is there if you know how to read it. You probably don't. Most people don't. The box doesn't tell you what good frost looks like versus bad frost. It says preheat to 425 degrees and cook 25 to 30 minutes. That's it. The box has one opinion, and that opinion is thermal. Here is what happens when you put the tray in anyway. The oven heats from the outside. The aluminum edges conduct first. The cornbread dressing in its small compartment starts to crisp at the corners before the center of the turkey section has fully released from frozen. Betty Cronin spent months on exactly this problem. The compartment sizes aren't decorative. The shallow sweet potato section heats faster and was engineered shallower on purpose, so it would catch up to the thicker turkey portion by minute 28. Every dimension was a timing decision. The tray is less a meal and more a synchronized event, and it only works if everything starts from exactly the right temperature, which is to say, fully frozen. Not mostly frozen, not almost frozen. Frozen. If the tray thawed and refroze, the timing is off. The sweet potato is already soft. The freezer does something to it that can't be undone. A soft, starchy surrender that reads less like a vegetable and more like a decision. The turkey, already compressed and pre-sliced into a texture closer to a cold cut than to any bird you've actually seen, loses more moisture the second time around. The gravy gets thinner. Nothing is where it was supposed to be on the temperature curve, and you don't find this out until minute 28 when you pull the tray out and the corner dressing is nearly charred and the center turkey is still cool enough to give you pause. Margaret Hollis, a quality inspector at a Chicago distribution warehouse, uses 2 fingers to press each case at the corner seam before it goes to the dock. She does this without looking. She has done it so many times her fingers know before she does. A case that gives too easily goes on the reject shelf. Most cases don't make the reject shelf, because the reject shelf reflects on the warehouse, and the warehouse has feelings about that. The salt is there because freezing and reheating flatten everything. The volatile compounds that make food smell like food disperse. The fat goes a little stale, and what's left tastes like a memory of a meal rather than the meal itself. Salt covers that. Salt covers almost everything, which is also the philosophy of most institutional cooking and a fair amount of 1950s home cooking, and the TV dinner has simply made the philosophy visible by putting it in a tray with 3 compartments and a retail price of 98 cents. You peel back the foil on the tray, because the instructions say to for the last few minutes, and the steam comes out in one warm, unified exhale, turkey, fat and sage, and something metallic that is either the gravy or the tray, and you can never quite tell which. The kitchen smells like a very small, very warm and very institutional Thanksgiving, a Thanksgiving held in a government building. The kind where someone brought rolls in a plastic bag and left them on the folding table near the window. You sit down with it anyway. The timer went off at the right moment. The show is still on. You cut into the turkey, and your fork meets something that has never, at any point in its existence, been a whole bird. This turkey was pre-sliced and pressed back together, compressed into neat uniform layers, with a texture that lands much closer to luncheon meat than to anything carved off a Thanksgiving centerpiece. It holds its shape with a quiet, stubborn, and slightly unsettling determination. The gravy helps. The gravy is doing a tremendous amount of work, smoothing over the fact that what's on your fork was pressed into a slab, not carved off a bird. You chew. You don't examine it too closely. The bird itself came from somewhere, before the slicer got to it. Contracted Midwest farms raised the birds under agreements with Swanson, which meant the turkey had a very structured career from birth to brine, with no say in any of it. It was processed, portioned, partially cooked, pressed into formation, and frozen before it had any chance to become the kind of centerpiece bird that someone would carve while wearing an apron and receiving compliments. By the time it reaches your tray, it has been cooked, cooled, sliced thin, and stacked back into a brick. The bird didn't survive this intact. No bird would. The compression happened because the compartment had a fixed geometry. Betty Cronin's tray was 11 inches by 7 inches, and the largest section had a specific depth and a specific surface area, and the turkey had to fit it uniformly so the heat could reach all of it at the same time from all directions. This is not a problem you have when you carve a turkey at a table. This is a problem you have when a salesman needs 10 million units to move by summer. So the turkey was engineered to be a tray insert, and then marketed to you as dinner. The gravy deserves its own moment. It's dense, it's salty, clocking in somewhere above what a cardiologist would describe as conservative, and it arrived on the tray already thickened because it had to survive a freeze cycle without separating into something that looked like a science project. A line cook named Mariette, who worked the gravy station at the Omaha plant, ladled it from a vat the size of a small car, wearing 2 pairs of gloves because the room was 30 degrees and the vat was not, and she didn't look down when she poured because she'd done it 11,000 times, and her hands already knew. The gravy went over the turkey. The turkey did not object. The salt arrives before anything else. It masks the flat, stale undertone that freezing and reheating leave behind, and you taste it before you taste the turkey. The salt is what you taste instead of thinking about what the turkey used to be. Meanwhile, in the other 2 compartments, the sweet potato has arrived at its final form. It isn't bad. It's soft and faintly sweet and slightly wet in a way that only a long freeze can produce, as if it gave something up during the crossing and decided not to ask for it back. The cornbread dressing is drier, a little crumbly at the edges where the heat hit hardest, and it carries most of the sage and thyme that warm the whole tray up to something that feels, if you don't push on it, like a holiday. The 3 compartments are doing something beyond food science. They're keeping the peace. The turkey stays on its side, the sweet potato stays on its side, the dressing doesn't wander. For the children who encounter TV dinners on the particular nights when their parents are leaving and the babysitter is eating cereal in the kitchen, this compartment arrangement is the meal's single greatest selling point. Their foods are not touching. Nothing has been contaminated by proximity. It's basically a Lunchable, invented 30 years early and aimed at the entire family. You finish the last of the turkey. The gravy has cooled slightly and settled into a texture that has opinions about temperature. The tray is still warm at the edges, still a little cool in the very centre where the geometry worked against Cronin's best calculations. You set your fork on the tray. The tray accepts it without comment. You open the newspaper, and a man you will never meet is disappointed in your dinner. The food critics of the age have decided that the frozen tray is a symptom of national decline, and they say so in long, elegant columns about the death of real cooking. One of them calls it the triumph of convenience over pleasure, and he means it as an insult, and he means you. You read his sentence twice. He has clearly never stood in a kitchen at 4:30 with 2 hours, 2 children, and 1 pair of hands. You fold the paper closed. Craig Claiborne has opinions. James Beard has opinions. They are not eating in front of a Motorola on a Tuesday with a babysitter to feed and a second load of laundry in the machine. Their opinions are shaped in restaurant dining rooms and well-staffed test kitchens, and their credentials are real, and none of that is the point. The point is that the column is about your dinner, and your dinner is in the oven. Consider what they're actually criticizing. It is not the turkey, it is not the dressing, it is the tray. The disposable aluminum tray, used once and discarded, offends a generation raised to reuse everything. The Depression-era adults who washed and refolded wax paper, who kept rubber bands in a jar, who had opinions about the structural waste involved in throwing away a perfectly flat piece of metal. The tray is, in their view, a moral failure with a peel-back foil cover. It's basically a single-use coffee pod, except it arrived 30 years early and nobody had yet invented the vocabulary to feel guilty about it at scale. The critics want you to feel the weight of what you're discarding. The tray disagrees. The tray is already in the bin. Meanwhile, Swanson sold 10 million dinners in the first year. The critics said the family dinner was dying, and 10 million aluminum trays said something else entirely. The numbers did not argue back. They didn't need to. They just accumulated. The criticism isn't entirely wrong. It's just aimed at the wrong person. You are not eating a TV dinner because you stopped caring about food. You're eating it because, had anyone shown you the Michigan Time Use surveys, they'd have told you were already spending roughly 90 minutes a day on meal prep and cleanup. The TV dinner is one night. The other nights, you're making a roast. The critics have written a column about a Tuesday and called it a civilization. A food writer named Douglas, you picture him with very clean fingernails, describes the aluminum compartment as a coffin for the American table. He means the communal pot, the shared bowl, the dish passed hand to hand. He is not wrong about what is being replaced. He is wrong about why. Nobody explains this to Douglas. You set the paper on top of the bin. Of course, the tray does have a metallic quality that the critics mention and that you know is true. A faint undertone, somewhere between clean and institutional, present in the first bite near the edge where the turkey touched aluminum directly. Not poison, not nothing, just aggressively there, like a minor chord in a song you otherwise enjoy. The gravy covers most of it. The gravy covers most things. The salt doesn't help the critics either, though nobody's counting milligrams in 1955. It's added because freezing and reheating flatten every flavor note that isn't salt or fat, and the solution to a flat meal is apparently to press harder. The critics taste it and say the food has no soul. The food has plenty of salt. These are not the same thing, and they're also, somehow, both true. You eat the last of the sweet potato, which has gone soft in the way only freezing can manage, starchy, mild, and quietly defeated. It is not the sweet potato of your memory. It is the sweet potato of a Thursday in November when nobody had time, and it is enough, and the television is on, and the column is in the bin. Douglas can write another one next week. You'll be here. You turn the box over, and there it is, the small printed seal that the government inspected this poultry, and you decide to find that reassuring. You have heard the whispers, a contamination scare at a plant somewhere, turkey that wasn't quite right, the word salmonella spoken quietly between neighbours. The food companies, for their part, wanted that inspection seal as much as anyone, because a stamp on the box sells more dinners than any amount of careful handling ever could. You look at the seal. The seal looks official. You put the tray in the oven and choose to believe in it. Now, the 1957 Poultry Products Inspection Act. Eisenhower signed it in August. The following year, a contamination incident in a frozen turkey product shows up in USDA records. Not a headline, not a recall, just a notation that something had gone wrong at some point in a cold chain involving a great deal of turkey and a great deal of trust. The act had required federal inspection of poultry processing plants, which sounds comprehensive until you consider that the plants had been operating without it for years and the seal, once introduced, functions primarily as an assurance to the person holding the box. Not to you exactly, to the box. A woman named Doris, line supervisor, third shift, Omaha, adjusts her gloves before the doors open at 6 a.m. The room she walks into is kept below freezing. Her boots are insulated, her jacket is insulated, her break room is 20 feet away and heated to something closer to ordinary. She will work 8 hours in a room colder than the inside of your refrigerator, handling trays that have just been filled, sealed, and are on their way to becoming your dinner. Her wage is about $1.10 an hour. The tray costs you 98 cents. The cold chain is a specific and unglamorous achievement. The turkey leaves the farm, enters a processing facility, gets cooked, carved, portioned, frozen, sealed into an aluminum tray, boxed, stacked, shipped to a distribution warehouse, transferred to a refrigerated truck, delivered to one of the 25,000 supermarkets operating in the US by 1955, placed in an open-topped chest freezer under fluorescent light, and pulled out by your hand, which is warm and immediately causes frost to bloom on the neighbouring packages. The whole system runs on the assumption that no one in this sequence makes a significant mistake. It also runs on the assumption that the inside of that tray was below 40 degrees at every moment of the journey. The assumption is mostly correct. Mostly is doing work in that sentence. You run your thumb over the printed seal. It earns its money right there, not by guaranteeing anything, but by turning a chain of decisions made by people you'll never meet into something small enough to hold. The 1958 incident stays quiet, small, and conveniently undocumented. No newspaper runs it. Your neighbour mentions something she heard from her neighbour, and the word salmonella does its work in the space between two women in a parking lot, and then everyone goes home and puts the tray in the oven anyway. The seal is still there in the morning. The oven is 425 degrees. Heat kills things. You have decided to believe this. Swanson's quality control team knew the math. A turkey that had partially thawed and refrozen looked identical to one that hadn't. The tray gave no sign. The gravy still sealed properly. The box still showed the grey-blue television screen in its dark frame. Nothing on the outside of the package could tell you what had happened to the inside of the package on its way to your freezer, which is the defining condition of processed food and the thing the seal is designed to make you not think about too carefully. It works. You're not thinking about it. The timer is running. You bought these dinners to save time, and tonight you do the math, and the math is not entirely on your side. Yes, this evening was easy. But across the whole week, you still spend about 90 minutes a day on getting meals together and cleaning up afterward, the same as your mother did, the same as you always have. The frozen tray gave you back an hour tonight, which you quietly spent making something elaborate tomorrow. The time didn't disappear, it just moved around. Convenience, it turns out, is less a savings than a rearrangement. The promise on the box was straightforward. Modern, effortless. A meal from frozen to table in 30 minutes. Leaving you free for the evening. What the box didn't mention was the preheat, which runs about 10 minutes before the clock even starts, or the standing around waiting, because you can't exactly leave the kitchen entirely, because last Tuesday something happened to the dressing that nobody wants to discuss. The oven doesn't volunteer information, it just hums and radiates and keeps its secrets. Meanwhile, whatever you were going to do with that freed hour turns out to have a set-up time of its own. Patricia, your neighbour, realized this sometime in the spring and described it as finding $1 in your coat and immediately owing $2. She said it in the driveway, very casually, while deadheading her roses. She has not stopped thinking about it since. Consider what the time actually goes toward, not cooking tonight. But the kitchen still needs wiping because the tray leaks slightly at one corner in a way the aluminum makes look worse than it is, brown and thin and dramatic. The tray itself needs disposing of, which should be simple and is simple, but still carries the faint social weight of throwing away something your mother would have washed and kept. You bend the tray in half over the bin. It resists mildly. Everything about this tray has had opinions. The Michigan time use surveys that researchers ran through the decade found the same number every time, 90 minutes, averaged across all 7 days, covering preparation and cleanup, not less on convenience nights. Averaged down from the elaborate ones, averaged up from the frozen ones, the number just sat there, 90 minutes. like a rent payment. You can pay it in small installments across the week or in one large installment on Sunday, but the total doesn't budge. The frozen dinner industry knew this and didn't advertise it. What they advertised was the easy night, photographed in soft focus with a woman in a neat dress who appears to have a completely unscheduled Tuesday. She isn't tired, she isn't calculating. She's watching television, the tray is in front of her, and she looks rested, settled, and impossibly caught up, like someone who has recently resolved all her outstanding obligations. It was, nutritionally and emotionally, aspirational fiction, the hallmark movie of meal photography, except the turkey is a pressed slab, and the dress is doing structural load-bearing work. Of course, there were genuine easy nights. You shouldn't minimize them. The nights when someone was sick, or a meeting ran late, or the children were both crying for reasons that hadn't yet been diagnosed. On those nights, the tray was genuinely the right answer, and you felt nothing complicated about eating it. The sweet potato was soft in its wet, frozen thaw way. The gravy was warm and salty and direct. The dressing tasted like sage and institutional memory. It was fine. It was exactly fine. That was the whole point. But the housekeeping columns in the back pages of the women's magazines had started publishing meal planning grids, and the grids had started treating Thursday's TV dinner as credit toward Friday's pot roast. And suddenly you were accounting for convenience the way you accounted for everything else. The easy night was borrowed from the week and repaid with interest. You lift the Dutch oven down for tomorrow and set it on the stove. It weighs more than a week of trays. The hour you save tonight is already inside it. You eat the salty, flattened institutional food, and the strange part is that you don't entirely mind it, and there is a reason for that. You spent the war years on ration books, learning to accept whatever was available and to be grateful for it. Your palate was trained in a hard school, conditioned to expect a certain plainness, a certain heaviness of salt, a certain distance from fresh. The frozen dinner tastes like the food you were taught to be satisfied with. It asks nothing new of you. You finish the tray. It is exactly as much as you expected. The ration book was a small, brown, officious little document, and it governed everything. Meat in 1942, then butter, then sugar and canned goods. You learned to make a small, thin, and resourceful meal out of whatever points were left on a Tuesday, which meant learning to treat limitation as creativity and creativity as patriotism. You made things stretch. You added salt. Salt was always available because salt wasn't rationed, and by the time the war ended you had a decade's habit of using it the way a painter uses primer, as the base coat under everything else. The frozen dinner's 1,100 milligrams of sodium per tray fits right into that habit. Nobody tells you the number because nobody is required to, and honestly you probably wouldn't have found it alarming. That's basically Tuesday. Betty Cronin, who spent her working days puzzling out how to make 3 compartments reach the same temperature simultaneously, understood this. The salt isn't an accident or a shortcut. It's doing structural work, covering the flat, muted flavors that freezing and reheating leave behind, the way a coat of varnish covers a scratch on furniture. The tray tastes finished because the salt insists it is. Consider what fresh actually meant to you in 1953. It meant planning your week around what was in season, around the schedule of the truck that came through, around what the icebox could hold without producing regret. It meant that by Thursday, fresh was a generous word for what you had. The frozen dinner steps into that gap not as a compromise but as a relief. The turkey is consistent. It has already made its worst decisions, pressed, pre-sliced, committed to a shape and a texture, and it will not surprise you. The sweet potato is soft in the specific wet way that only freezing can produce. But soft has never been an insult on a plate that otherwise asks something of your teeth. You ate harder things during the war without complaint. The tray feels generous by comparison. Dorothy Wexler, a homemaker in Dayton, sets the empty tray on the kitchen counter after dinner and considers washing it. She picks it up. She puts it down. She grew up reusing everything because her mother grew up reusing everything because throwing something away when it still had a shape was a kind of small recklessness that the Depression made very difficult to perform casually. The tray sits there radiating this specific moral weight for a moment. Then she throws it away. The aluminum tray is designed to be used once, which in 1953 is still a slightly transgressive act, like arriving overdressed to something simple. You do it anyway. The war taught you what actual sacrifice looks like, and it does not look like a foil tray. Of course, the food critics don't see it that way. James Beard, who has strong opinions about everything, treats the TV dinner as evidence of a civilization quietly choosing to forget what it knows. Craig Claiborne writes about it in The Register of a Man Who Has Just Discovered Something Upsetting Under a Floorboard. They are not wrong about what the food is. The turkey is closer to a cold cut than to a bird. The dressing has a faint metallic undertone that the salt mostly covers and mostly doesn't. But they're describing it from outside the school where you learn to eat, which is a school that ran for 4 years and had no electives. The food on this tray isn't worse than what you ate in 1944. It's approximately the same. That's the point. That's the whole point. You wait the full half hour for your fast, modern, convenient dinner because the appliance that would make it actually fast does not exist in your kitchen yet. The microwave has technically been invented. An engineer noticed radar waves melting a chocolate bar in his pocket back in 1945. But the machines are enormous, expensive, and years away from any ordinary home. So you do it the slow way, the only way, heating a whole oven to warm a single tray. The future is coming for this dinner. It just hasn't arrived. For now, you preheat and you wait. The oven takes a slow, steady, and uneventful 15 minutes to reach 425 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 15 minutes before the 25 to 30 minutes of actual cooking. The total time from box to table is closer to 45 minutes, which is not dramatically faster than boiling water and opening a can, but it feels different because the oven is doing the work and you are, technically, free. You stand in the kitchen anyway. You don't entirely trust it. This is where Betty Cronin earns her paycheck. Cronin, Swanson's home economist, has spent months solving a problem that sounds simple and isn't. How do you get turkey and gravy, cornbread dressing, and sweet potato to all reach eating temperature at exactly the same moment, starting from frozen at a single oven setting? Each component absorbs heat differently. The dressing wants to crisp, the sweet potato wants to soften. The turkey, already pressed and pre-sliced and closer in texture to a pressed deli slice than anything carved from an actual bird, needs the gravy to reach a simmer without evaporating. She arranges the compartments, adjusts the ratios, maps out the geometry of the tray. She solves it. Jerry Thomas, the salesman who claimed credit for the whole idea, gets his name in the newspapers. Cronin gets the 425 degrees Fahrenheit instruction on the side of the box. Minute 20. The smell arrives. Turkey fat first, then sage and thyme and something starchy and warm from the dressing, and underneath it all a faint metallic note that the tray contributes whether you want it to or not. By minute 25, the kitchen smells like a very small, very institutional Thanksgiving. Not bad. Not entirely good. Aggressively committed. The timer rings. Now, getting it out of the oven. The tray has no handle. The foil is thin. The edges are hot enough to raise a welt, and the cardboard sleeve you set aside 25 minutes ago is now across the room. Margaret Pfeiffer, third house on the left, the one with the TV antenna that leans slightly northeast, solves this by sliding a dish towel under the tray with the slow, deliberate care of a bomb technician. She doesn't rush. The tray has burned her twice before, and the tray has no memory of this, but she does. You carry it to the TV tray stand. The stand unfolds from its bracket with a light metallic snap, a Samsonite, sold in sets of 4, which means somewhere in this suburb there are 4 stands, and 3 of them are leaning against a wall in a closet, waiting for guests who will never actually eat off them. You set the tray down. The food steams unevenly. The edges of the dressing are darkened. The center of the sweet potato is still cool in a way you will discover only after taking a bite, like a small, starchy surprise the tray has been saving for you. Swanson's marketing team studied television schedules when they set that 25 to 30 minute cook time. Prime time starts around 7. I Love Lucy is on at 9, with 60 million people watching. The idea was for dinner to finish at a natural break in the evening's programming, which is basically Netflix building a countdown into the autoplay, except the countdown is your oven and the show won't wait. You eat. The turkey is soft and pressed and uniform in a way that no turkey pulled from a real bird has ever been. The gravy covers most of this. Salt covers the rest. There is a lot of salt. You don't know how much. The box doesn't say. You navigate the supermarket, and you notice that the frozen section keeps getting longer. A few years ago it was a single small case in the corner. Now it stretches down an entire aisle, a row of humming chest freezers exhaling cold air into the store, and you plan your route through the shop around it, frozen things last, so they don't thaw before you reach the register. The whole store has quietly reorganized itself around the idea of cold. You time your loop accordingly. The freezer aisle has become the destination, and everything else is on the way to it. By 1955, there are roughly 25,000 supermarkets operating across the United States, and nearly all of them have added open-topped chest freezers as a standard feature. You reach in, and the cold air spills over your forearm. The packages feel like cold stone. Some of them have frost forming along the edges where someone disturbed the seal, and they leave a faint chill on your fingertips that lingers for the next 2 aisles. The freezer doesn't resist, exactly. It just makes you commit, fully, coldly, and with both hands. Consider what's actually in there. Swanson is no longer the only name in the case. Morton TV Dinners arrived in 1954. Banquet Foods is running a budget line 10 or 20 cents cheaper than Swanson, which is the frozen dinner equivalent of a price war waged entirely in nickels. Stouffer's is selling a premium foil meal for people who feel that eating institutional food out of aluminum should at least cost more. By 1955, at least a dozen brands are competing, and combined retail sales are pushing $30 million a year. The chest freezer that started as a corner novelty is now basically a catalogue. A woman named Patricia stands at the case on a Tuesday, tipping each box sideways to read the instructions on the back. She does this for every brand, in order, working down the row. Her coat is still on. The store is cold enough that this isn't unusual. She sets the Morton back and picks up the Swanson, then sets that back too. She picks up the Morton again. This decision is taking longer than dinner would. This is where the math starts to matter. At 98 cents, a Swanson TV dinner costs less than the chicken it contains would cost you to buy raw, prep, and cook on a Tuesday night when you've already been standing since 7 in the morning. The box doesn't mention that. It shows a television set, which is basically a product telling you to take it home and stop thinking about it. You take it home, you stop thinking about it. The salt is doing some work in the meantime, covering the flat, stale character that freezing and reheating leave behind. There's no nutrition label on the tray in 1955. The box shows the television. You interpret this as information. The competitors understand something Swanson established. The 3 compartments are not incidental. Children specifically appreciate that nothing is touching anything else, which makes the TV dinner a Lunchable invented 30 years early and marketed at the entire household simultaneously. Banquet knows this. Morton knows this. The compartment is not a convenience feature. It is a peace treaty between food groups, and it is holding. Of course, $30 million in retail sales requires a production line behind it, and the production line is cold. Swanson's Omaha plant runs its packing floors below freezing. The mostly female workforce wears heavy gloves, insulated boots, and enough layers that 2 workers standing next to each other are essentially a pile of coats that happens to be assembling trays. Wages run about $1.10 to $1.50 an hour. Annual turnover runs between 30 and 40%, which means the line is constantly training someone new to pack a tray at below freezing speed without losing a glove finger to the conveyor. The work is cold. The math is cold. The product is cold. This all fits together. You don't notice the exact moment the aluminum tray leaves your life, because that is how these things go. For 30 years, the 3-compartment tray sits in freezers and ovens and trash cans across the country, almost unchanged, and then the microwave finally arrives in ordinary kitchens, and the metal tray simply cannot follow it there. New trays appear, plastic and paperboard, and the old aluminum one slips off the shelf without ceremony. The dinner survives. The object that defined it does not. Somewhere 4 billion frozen meals a year still trace back to a train full of unsold turkey. The microwave gets the blame, or the credit, depending on how you feel about the tray. Consumer microwave ovens trickle into American kitchens through the 1970s and go mainstream in the 1980s, and at that point the aluminum becomes a liability. The whole format had been engineered around the conventional oven, the 425 degrees, the 2 5 to 3 0 minutes, the edges that overcooked while the center figured out what it wanted to do. Plastic trays heat evenly enough, or at least they heat in a way that doesn't arc and spark and create a small domestic emergency at 6:45 on a Tuesday. By 1986, Swanson rebrands the line. The aluminum tray becomes Hungry Man, becomes Le Menu. I. The product pivots toward microwave plastic with the quiet confidence of a company that has already won. The original box, the one styled to look like a TV set, the grey-blue screen in the dark frame, the one that told you with its own face what you were supposed to do with it, is replaced by packaging that looks like packaging. No screen, no frame, no joke about it. What the tray leaves behind isn't sentiment, it's numbers. 4.2 billion frozen meals sold annually in the United States, worth about $18 billion. The Lean Cuisine line launches in 1981, aimed at the woman who has been in the workforce continuously since the war and still has not been offered more time. The premium segment grows. The budget segment never really shrinks. Stouffer's, which entered the market in 1954 with foil trays and a slightly superior attitude, is still on the shelf. The industry Swanson's turkey problem accidentally founded is now larger than anyone standing in a refrigerated railcar in 1953 could have reasonably projected. Mariella, a quality control supervisor at a Midwest frozen meal plant in 1987, holds a new plastic tray up to the light and turns it once, the way you'd check a suspect peach. The compartments are still 3: turkey, starch and vegetable, separate, sealed and dependable. She sets it back on the line without comment. The tray has opinions about nothing. This is considered an improvement. Of course, the critics never came around. They wrote their columns from restaurant dining rooms. The freezer aisle expanded anyway. $30 million in 1955. $18 billion now. The market was not reading the reviews. What the tray actually did was simpler than the critics made it sound. It gave you back an hour of a weeknight that used to belong entirely to the kitchen. Not every night. Michigan time use surveys from the 1950s show you still spending 90 minutes a day, on average, on meals and cleanup, because the elaborate Saturday roast and the from-scratch Tuesday pie were still happening in your kitchen. The TV dinner was the night that was not that. It was the night a babysitter was in charge, or no one wanted to cook, or the turkey from last week was still faintly present in the refrigerator, and no one could face it again. That night now had a 9-8-cent solution. The aluminum tray held it, briefly, and then passed it forward. Somewhere in a landfill, there are 30 years of aluminum trays that cannot be reached. The tray was designed to be thrown away in a decade that still thought throwing things away was slightly wrong. It went anyway. It was, in its way, the most honest object of the era. And so here we are at the end of the evening. The oven has cooled. The aluminum tray is in the trash, or possibly still on the counter, because someone in the house couldn't quite decide whether throwing it away counted as wasteful. The television is on. The television is always on. You woke up in post-war America, and you did not have a quiet night. You watched a Brooklyn naturalist stand on the Labrador ice and invent the future of food by staring at a frozen fish. You watched 10 refrigerated railcars haul 260 tons of unsold turkey back and forth across the country because nobody could find a place to park a frozen mountain of bird. You met Betty Cronin, who solved the entire thermal puzzle of the tray and got a paragraph in a memo for her trouble. You pulled a tray out of a 425-degree oven with a dish towel folded twice. You sat down in front of I Love Lucy, and you ate something, pressed, salted, and faintly metallic that was somehow exactly enough. It was never elegant, and it was never going to be. The turkey kept to its luncheon meat agenda. The sweet potato had quietly given up somewhere around Nebraska. The gravy covered what it could, which was most things, and 10 million people did this on the very same night, in the very same posture, all facing the very same soft grey screen. But the kitchen is quiet now. The line in Omaha has gone home for the night. The rail cars have finally, after all those miles, found somewhere to park. So let the day go. You don't have to solve the freezer tonight. You don't have to beat the clock, or the broadcast schedule, or the magazine on the counter that still thinks you should have made a roast from scratch. Let your shoulders drop. Let the oven stay cold. Let the long, strange, and salty history of dinner settle somewhere behind you. The tray is handled. The screen is going dark. And the turkey, after everything it went through back in 1953, would want you to rest. So rest now, and sleep well.